Hey guys, tonight we're going to explore something a little different. A story that begins, like so many others, with an ordinary object, an heirloom passed down through generations. But this one, well, this one is far from ordinary. It has a curse wrapped around it, a history that you won't find in your family photo albums. You probably won't survive this, but that's part of the fun, isn't it? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The mirror sat there tucked away in the corner of the dusty attic. At first glance, it didn't seem remarkable. The frame was weathered wood, chipped in places with intricate carvings that were barely visible through the layers of grime. It had been forgotten for years, collecting dust hidden beneath forgotten relics from generations past. But when Alice first spotted it, something inside her stirred. She had never been one to believe in superstition or folklore, but there was something undeniably captivating about this mirror. Something that made her step closer, despite the strange unease creeping up her spine. Alice had always been drawn to old things. She loved antiques, loved the history they carried with them, the lives they had witnessed. The house where she grew up was filled with them old furniture paintings, faded photographs. And yet, this mirror felt different. It wasn't just an object. It felt like a presence, like it had been waiting for her. Her fingers brushed against the surface, and she felt the faintest tremor in the air, like the whole room exhaled. The mirror was cold to the touch, colder than anything she had ever felt before, as though it had been carved from the very bones of the house. She hesitated for a moment, staring at her reflection, the dim lighting casting shadows on her face. For a brief second, the reflection seemed to distort, as though it wasn't quite hers. Shaking the feeling off, Alice turned the mirror toward the light, trying to catch the details of the frame, but the dust covered much of the intricate carvings. She decided to clean it up, thinking she could perhaps find some more clues about its origins. She dragged it down the narrow staircase, feeling a strange pull in her chest, as if the mirror was drawing her deeper into its mystery. Her grandmother had left her the house after she passed, and though Alice wasn't particularly close to her, there were moments when she felt the weight of the old woman's absence. The house seemed to hum with it, like a reminder that no matter how many years passed, it would always be there, its history intertwined with Alice's own. Once in the living room, Alice set the mirror down and began cleaning its surface with a cloth, careful not to damage the frame. The moment she cleared the dust away, the mirror seemed to come to life. It gleamed with an intensity that made her pause. She hadn't noticed it before, but now she could make out faint symbols etched into the frame symbols that were foreign to her, ancient, as if they had been carved long before her family had even lived in the house. Her breath caught in her throat. For a second, she thought she saw something in the reflection. It wasn't her own face. It was another woman, her features blurred but somehow familiar. She blinked and the image was gone, replaced by her own face once again. But the image had lingered for a fraction of a second, long enough for Alice to feel that unmistakable chill run down her spine. Probably just the shadows, she muttered to herself, forcing a laugh. It's just an old mirror, nothing to worry about. But she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it, something hidden beneath the surface. Later that night, as the house settled into its usual silence, Alice found herself standing before the mirror again. It was as if something was pulling her to it. She couldn't stop herself from staring at her reflection, watching the way the dim light from the candle flickered in the glass. And then again, she saw it. The face. The woman in the reflection wasn't just a blur this time. Alice could make out more details. The woman was older than her, with sharp features and a dark gaze that seemed to pierce right through the glass, straight into Alice's soul. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something haunting about the way she stared back at Alice. A warning, a message that she couldn't quite grasp. Alice's hand trembled as she reached out to touch the mirror's surface. The coldness intensified as her fingers made contact and the reflection shifted once more. This time, it didn't return to her face. Instead, the woman in the glass smiled. It was a slow, knowing smile, one that made Alice's heart race. She yanked her hand back, stumbling away from the mirror. The smile in the reflection lingered for just a moment longer before fading, and Alice was left staring at her own confused, frightened face. Her breath was shallow, her mind racing. What was that? She whispered to herself, the words barely escaping her lips. She could feel her pulse throbbing in her neck, and she fought to steady herself. It had to be a trick of the light. The fatigue was getting to her, she told herself. That was all. But the mirror wasn't finished with her yet. That night, as Alice tried to sleep, the house was unnaturally quiet. The usual creaks of the floorboards, the rustling of leaves outside were gone. In their place, there was only an eerie stillness. The silence was so heavy that it pressed against her chest. She turned restlessly in bed, unable to escape the feeling that she was being watched. She tried to push it out of her mind, to tell herself it was just her imagination, but in the back of her mind, something gnawed at her. She knew that something was wrong. Something had awakened when she cleaned the mirror. Something had stirred in the air, and it wasn't going to let her go. Alice lay there staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Her mind kept returning to the mirror, to the face in the reflection, to the smile that wasn't hers. A shiver ran down her spine, and she knew this was just the beginning. The night stretched on each minute, slower than the last, the silence wrapping itself tighter around Alice, until it felt like the air was made of thick, invisible threads. The house, once familiar now, felt like a stranger, its quietness oppressive, its walls closing in. Every shadow seemed to hold something lurking within it, watching her, waiting. She rolled over her fingers, gripping the edge of the bed as if she could hold on to something solid, to keep herself anchored to the present. She couldn't sleep. The image of the woman in the mirror haunted her, following her, even into her dreams, twisting and contorting into something more sinister, something that felt like it had always been waiting for her. The smile, that slow, knowing smile, continued to haunt her thoughts. Alice's gaze flicked to the clock on her bedside table. The small red numbers glowed in the dark, blinking in the stillness. It was just past 3 a.m. She felt an intense pull to get up to go downstairs to check on the mirror once more. It was as though something in the house was calling her, tugging at her like a rope that connected her to some ancient, forgotten past. You're being ridiculous, Alice told herself. It's just an old mirror. It's nothing. But her body didn't listen. She couldn't fight the feeling that had settled into her chest, the inexplicable need to confront whatever was in that mirror. With a shaky breath, Alice swung her legs off the side of the bed, her bare feet touching the cold wooden floor. The house creaked under her weight as she stood, and for a brief second, she wondered if the house was alive, if it was somehow aware of her presence. It was a ridiculous thought, but she couldn't shake it. She was no longer sure what was real and what was just her mind playing tricks. The cold air of the hallway hit her as she walked down the stairs, the familiar wooden steps groaning under her feet. Each sound seemed amplified in the stillness of the night, echoing through the empty house. Her footsteps were the only noise, each one growing louder in her ears, until it felt like the walls themselves were closing in on her. When she reached the living room, the mirror stood in the corner, still and silent as if it had been waiting for her. The light from the nearby lamp cast faint, angular shadows across the floor, but the mirror was just there. Its reflective surface was dull in the dim light, and yet Alice couldn't help but feel the pull again, that nagging sense that the mirror was more than just glass. She approached it slowly, almost hesitantly, her breath coming in shallow, nervous gasps. Her reflection was clear this time, but it felt wrong. The edges of her reflection seemed sharper, more defined, while the rest of the room seemed to blur and fade into nothingness. She felt her pulse quicken as her hand hovered near the surface of the mirror. Her reflection stared back at her, but there was something unsettling about it. Her eyes were wide, her mouth slightly agape, as if something inside her, something buried deep, was trying to break free. And then there she was again, the woman. She was standing in the reflection just behind Alice's own form, her face still indistinct, but filled with that same eerie smile. The woman's eyes, cold and vacant, locked onto Alice's, and Alice felt a jolt of fear shoot through her spine. She tried to pull away, but it was as if her body refused to listen. Her feet were rooted to the spot her eyes locked with the figure in the mirror. The woman's smile widened ever so slightly, and for a moment it looked almost satisfied. No. Alice thought her mind screaming for her to break free to run, but her body stayed still, unable to move. The reflection seemed to stretch, as if the woman was drawing closer, but no, Alice wasn't sure if the woman was stepping toward her, or if she was stepping into the reflection. In that moment, the air grew thick, and the temperature in the room dropped sharply. A cold that made her skin crawl seeped into her bones, and the shadows around her seemed to grow darker, more alive. Alice's heart hammered in her chest as she struggled to look away, to move, but the mirror had her in its grip. The whispers returned, low at first, then growing louder. "You've seen her before," the voices murmured. "She has always been here." Her breath came in ragged gasps now, her chest tightening. She finally managed to break free from the mirror's grasp and stumbled backward. Her reflection wavered for just a moment, and the woman vanished, only to be replaced by Alice herself, standing breathing heavily, her eyes wide and terrified. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what came next. As Alice stood there, panting, her eyes still fixed on the mirror, she saw something in the reflection that made her blood run cold. Behind her, standing in the doorway of the living room, was a figure. It was shrouded in darkness, its form indistinct, but Alice could feel its presence dark and heavy. The figure didn't move. It just stood there watching her. Alice's mind raced. She turned quickly, expecting to see someone in the doorway behind her, but the room was empty. No one was there. When she turned back to the mirror, the figure was still there, in the reflection, but not in the room with her. What the hell is happening? She could feel the panic rising in her chest again, but she couldn't move. The figure in the reflection didn't seem to acknowledge her. It just stood its form still, and unmoving, its presence overwhelming. The air felt thick, now heavier with each passing moment. And then the whispers grew louder until they were a chorus of voices, all murmuring the same thing. "She's waiting for you." Alice's heart raced, her hands trembling at her sides. The figure in the mirror remained motionless, but the air around her felt suffocating, the space around her warping with the dark energy that clung to the mirror. She had to leave. She had to get out of there. And yet, despite everything, despite the growing sense of dread consuming her, Alice couldn't tear her eyes away from the reflection. It was as though it wasn't just a mirror anymore. It had become a doorway, a portal, and she couldn't look away. Alice's pulse pounded in her ears, a deafening drumbeat that seemed to reverberate through the very air around her. Her body felt frozen in place, her limbs locked, as if the mirror itself had taken root inside her mind, holding her hostage in the reflection. The figure in the doorway of the living room never moved, its presence only growing heavier. The whispers that had once been distant were now like a chorus of voices surrounding her, their words slipping into her consciousness like poison. "She's waiting for you." They repeated over and over again until the words lost their meaning, and all that remained was the overwhelming pressure in her chest. The figure in the reflection remained still, but Alice could feel its gaze on her, its cold eyes boring into her very soul. The air in the room felt suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, their edges more jagged, as though the darkness was trying to consume her from all sides. Alice's legs trembled, her breath shallow, as she fought to move, but her feet felt as though they were stuck to the ground, weighed down by the oppressive energy that seemed to pulse from the mirror. The figure, now growing clearer in the reflection, seemed to loom larger, its shape more defined. It was no longer just a shadow, it was a person, a woman, or something that had once been human. Her heart skipped a beat as she saw the figure's face, its features now visible in the mirror. The woman's face was pale, her eyes hollow and dark like pits of endless sorrow. Her expression was blank, but there was something behind her eyes, a recognition, a familiarity. The woman was staring directly at Alice, but there was no warmth in her gaze, no compassion, only an icy emptiness that seemed to reach into her very soul. "I know you," the figure whispered, her voice soft but chilling. "I've always known you." The words echoed in Alice's mind as though they were spoken not just by the figure in the mirror, but by something deeper, something buried in her own past. She staggered backward, her breath coming in ragged gasps, but the mirror held her, its gaze relentless. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body refused to move. The whispers continued, their voices melding into one, a maddening crescendo that filled every corner of her mind. "You can't escape," they sang. "You've always been a part of it." Alice felt the weight of their words settle deep within her chest. She had known something was wrong with the mirror from the moment she found it, but now she realized just how deep the roots of this curse ran. This wasn't just an object. It was a link to something far darker, something older than the house itself. The house had just been the surface, the vessel for the darkness that had always been waiting to be unleashed. The figure in the mirror stepped forward, its image shifting, as though it were moving closer to Alice through the glass. She could feel the cold air around her chill even further, and the shadows seemed to thicken, swirling around her, like a fog that threatened to swallow her whole. "You've seen me before." The woman's voice echoed her words, growing louder, more insistent. "I've always been here, and I will always be here, watching, waiting until you understand." Alice's head spun as the whispers filled her mind, their voices warping, distorting. She could see her reflection flicker, and for a moment she saw something different, someone different. It was her, but her eyes were hollow dark, like the woman's. Her face was pale, drained of all color. She looked like a ghost, like a shell of herself. Her breath hitched in her throat. This wasn't just a reflection. It was a warning. The mirror wasn't just a doorway. It was a connection, a link to something else, something beyond. The shadows behind her in the reflection began to move, swirling and twisting, taking shape. The air felt heavier, colder, as though the very fabric of reality was being torn apart. Alice's body trembled uncontrollably, and she forced herself to look away from the mirror to break free from its hypnotic pull. But her gaze kept returning, drawn to the figure that had now fully stepped into the reflection. The woman's eyes locked with hers, and for a moment, Alice saw the truth. The woman wasn't just a reflection of herself. She was something else, something ancient, The connection between Alice and the mirror was deeper than she had realized, and the figure standing there was a piece of herself, that she had buried a part of her soul, lost to time, to something she couldn't even comprehend. She finally managed to break the hold, taking a shaky step backward. The figure in the mirror remained its gaze, following her every movement. But even as she tried to step away, she felt something pulling her back. The mirror was calling to her, the darkness within it clawing at her mind. "You cannot run from me," the voice in the reflection whispered. "I have always been inside you, Alice. You cannot escape what you are." Alice's hands shot up to her ears, trying to block out the voice, the whispering that filled her head. She couldn't understand. It couldn't understand why this was happening. What did the mirror want from her? What was it trying to show her? The air around her thickened as the whispers grew louder until it felt as if they were tearing at her from all sides. The house, the figure, the mirror, they weren't just haunting her. They were pulling her back into something that had always been waiting for her to return. And then it hit her. This was never just about the house. The house had merely been a manifestation, a vessel for something far darker, something far older. The mirror was its anchor, its tether, and Alice had unknowingly stepped into it when she first laid eyes on it. It had been waiting for her, pulling her into its depths, and now that it had her, it would never let go. Her reflection began to shift again, its image warping. Alice felt herself being pulled forward toward the glass, toward the woman who had always been a part of her. It was time for her to face it. But what was it? Alice could feel the cold seeping through her skin, settling deep into her bones as she stood frozen, her eyes locked on the mirror. The whispers had stopped for a moment, and for a brief, almost unbearable instant, the silence was louder than the chaos that had been spiraling through her mind. Her reflection seemed to flicker, warping and distorting, but it was more than just a visual trick. It felt like the very air around her was bending, folding in on itself, and the room seemed to stretch unnaturally. She could almost feel the pull of the mirror like a magnet that was drawing her in, pulling at the deepest parts of her soul. The woman in the mirror, who she had first mistaken for a mere reflection, was now no longer just a figure. She was becoming real, her features sharpening with every passing second, as though the reflection itself was bleeding into the room. Alice's legs trembled, but she couldn't move, couldn't look away. It was like she was stuck in a trance, her mind locked in place by some invisible force. The figure smiled at her again, but this time, it wasn't the eerie, knowing grin from before. This smile was something more sinister, more unsettling. There was a darkness in it, something Alice couldn't fully comprehend, but it was unmistakable in its malice. The woman's eyes, those hollow, dark eyes, seemed to stare into Alice's very soul. "You're so much like me." The woman's voice echoed soft, yet full of a haunting kind of power. "You've always been even before you knew it." Alice's heart skipped a beat. The voice was so familiar. The words hung in the air like a curse, and it felt like the floor had dropped out from under her, leaving her suspended in a moment that stretched on endlessly. She wanted to speak, to scream, but the words caught in her throat. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her chest tightening with the weight of the woman's gaze. "I've always been inside you." The voice continued, growing colder, more commanding. "You carry me with you, hidden deep inside your heart, your mind. You've always known the truth, but you've been too afraid to face it." Alice's mind raced. She knew something was wrong. She knew this wasn't just about the mirror or the house or anything she had experienced in the past few days. This was something older, something far darker. What truth, she thought desperately? Her reflection in the mirror began to change again, shifting into something wrong. It wasn't just her face anymore. It was her, but twisted, distorted. Her features were sharp, her eyes too wide, her expression contorted into a grin she didn't recognize. It was like looking at herself in a nightmare that had always been there just beneath the surface. The coldness grew, and she could feel her body trembling, as if something was crawling beneath her skin, something dark, something that had always been there, waiting for this moment. The woman's reflection reached out toward her, her hand pressing against the glass, and Alice felt the faintest tremor in the air, as if something unseen was trying to cross over. "You cannot escape what you are," the woman hissed, her voice growing more forceful. "You've always been mine, and now you will remember." Alice tried to break free from the trance, but the weight of the woman's words, the intensity of the darkness that filled the room, kept her rooted in place. She felt a presence growing behind her, a shadow that pressed in on her back, like something that had always been there, a part of her she had buried long ago. "No," Alice whispered, her voice trembling. "No, I'm not you. I'm not." But the woman's laugh interrupted her, low and chilling, filling the room, like the sound of nails scraping on glass. "You can lie to yourself, Alice," the woman said, her smile widening, the darkness in her eyes deepening. "But I've always been inside you. I was there when you found the mirror. I was there when you cleaned it off. I was there when you couldn't look away." A cold wave of dread washed over Alice as the words sank in. The reflection in the mirror was no longer just a part of her mind. It was something else, something alive. A piece of her that had been dormant, hidden deep within, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Something she had buried beneath layers of fear and denial, too afraid to confront. "You can't run from me," the woman continued, her voice wrapping itself around Alice's thoughts, twisting them. "You belong to me. You always have. All it took was for you to look into the mirror." Alice's mind reeled. It didn't make sense. None of it did. She had never asked for this. She had never asked for this cursed inheritance, this dark connection that had festered in her family's past. She wasn't some vessel for evil. She wasn't the reflection the mirror had shown her. But no matter how much she fought it, no matter how much she wanted to deny it, the truth was undeniable. The woman in the mirror had always been a part of her. It was just waiting for the right moment, waiting for Alice to be vulnerable enough to see it. The mirror pulsed, the glass flickering like it was alive, and for a brief moment, Alice thought she saw the woman's reflection step out of the mirror. She gasped, stepping backward, her body moving on instinct, but she tripped and fell, hitting the cold floor with a hard thud. The figure in the reflection began to step forward, as though the mirror could no longer contain her. It was happening. It was real. "You're mine now," the woman's voice whispered again, as the darkness that had been just an image in the mirror began to creep toward her. "There's no escaping me. You'll never leave this place. You'll never leave me." Alice scrambled backward, her heart racing as the shadows of the room seemed to stretch toward her, reaching for her legs, trying to pull her back to the mirror. The house felt alive again, its walls shifting, breathing with a malevolent force that she had never known was possible, but she refused to let it consume her. She wasn't going to let the mirror claim her again. "No!" Alice shouted, her voice hoarse with fear and fury. She pushed herself up, her eyes locked on the reflection, trying to shake off the sensation of the woman's presence crawling inside her. The mirror seemed to vibrate with energy, but Alice didn't look away. She couldn't. If she did, if she gave in, the house would win. "You will not take me," she breathed, her voice shaking but determined. I won't let you. For a moment the world held its breath, and then the reflection smiled again. The smile on the reflection's face twisted, widening unnaturally, stretching across the figure's face like an unholy mask. The darkness around Alice deepened, thickening like a storm cloud, and the temperature in the room plummeted. She could feel the cold creeping into her bones, seeping into her skin, but she refused to back down. The woman's eyes, those hollow, empty eyes, never left her. They pierced through Alice with a malice that froze her in place. The reflection wasn't just a mirror of her anymore. It had become a part of the room, a malevolent force that seemed to reach out from the glass, its presence clawing at her, pulling her deeper into its grip. The air around her felt charged, like the calm before a storm, thick with something dark and ancient. And yet Alice stood her ground, each breath shallow, each movement careful but determined. "You cannot escape." The woman in the reflection whispered her voice, now a low, guttural rasp that vibrated through Alice's body. "You are already mine. You have always been mine. And now you'll join me. Forever." Alice's heart raced, but she clenched her fists, trying to suppress the terror that threatened to overwhelm her. This wasn't just a hallucination. This wasn't a trick of the light or her mind playing games with her. This mirror, this cursed object, had somehow become a gateway, a link to something far darker than she had ever imagined. It wasn't just a reflection. It was an invitation, a tether to something ancient, something that had always been there, waiting for the right moment to reclaim her. But Alice wouldn't let it take her. She couldn't. Her thoughts raced. She remembered the stories her grandmother had told her when she was young. Stories about cursed objects, mirrors that showed more than just reflections and dark forces that could bind themselves to the souls of the living. Was this what had happened to her grandmother? Was this why the house had always felt so wrong, so alive? "No!" Alice whispered to herself, her voice trembling, but it was the only sound that could pierce the suffocating silence. "I won't let it happen. I will not be you." The reflection's grin widened, showing teeth too sharp, too perfect, and Alice felt the floor beneath her shift. Her body felt light, as if the gravity around her had warped. The shadows of the room pressed closer, and the walls seemed to close in around her, their edges melting into the darkness that grew with every passing second. The mirror seemed to draw her in its surface, rippling like water, beckoning her closer. "Come closer." The woman in the mirror whispered again, her voice now a seductive pull, as though trying to lure Alice into its depths. "You're already here, Alice. You've always been part of this." But Alice resisted. She had fought too hard, faced too much to let the mirror claim her now. The fear inside her, the terror that had once paralyzed her, was fading. It was being replaced by something else resolve. She wouldn't be a victim anymore. She had lived through the horrors of the house. She had faced the dark forces that had tried to drag her under. She wasn't going to give in now. Alice took a step back, her heart still pounding in her chest. But there was a sense of clarity now. The mirror wasn't a door to the past. It wasn't some ancient relic that had come to claim her. It was just an object. And objects only had power if you gave it to them. With a deep breath, she reached for the nearest thing, a nearby chair. She gripped the back of it, her fingers tightening around the wood as she stared at the mirror. The reflection in the glass was still staring back at her, still smiling that cold, twisted smile. But Alice didn't look away this time. "You are nothing," Alice said firmly, her voice cutting through the tension. "I refuse to let you control me." And with that, she swung the chair at the mirror, The sound of wood crashing against glass was deafening. The mirror vibrated as the chair struck it, sending ripples through the reflection, distorting the image in front of her. For a moment, the room seemed to pause, and Alice's breath caught in her throat. But the mirror didn't break. It was as if the glass had absorbed the impact, like it wasn't made of anything tangible. The surface was unscathed, the reflection still eerily intact. But something in the air shifted. A low hum began to resonate from the mirror like a warning. The temperature in the room dropped even further, the chill biting at Alice's skin. And then, from the reflection, something moved. The woman in the mirror was no longer smiling. She was angry, her face twisting, the once calm expression now contorted into something far darker. Her eyes burned with an intensity Alice had never seen before. "You think you can stop me?" The voice, though still coming from the mirror, was no longer soft or seductive. It was filled with rage, and Alice could feel it deep in her bones, like a tremor running through her very soul. The shadows around her thickened, and the air grew heavy again, as if the house itself was drawing closer, pulling her back into its grasp. The woman's face in the mirror grew larger, her features stretching beyond the boundaries of the glass. It was like the reflection was reaching for her, its arms extending out toward her fingers, twisting and elongating, desperate to pull her in. "You will join me!" the woman hissed, her voice filled with fury. "You are mine!" Alice's body trembled with the force of the words, the air around her vibrating with an energy that made her skin crawl. Her heart raced, but there was no time to be afraid. She had to act now. The house, the mirror, the darkness, this was all part of something far bigger than she had realized. And the only way out was to face it, to destroy it. Without thinking, Alice lunged at the mirror, her hands reaching for the glass, pushing against it with every ounce of strength she had left. The figure in the reflection pulled back, recoiling at her touch, but Alice pressed harder, her fingers digging into the cold surface, trying to force it to break. And then, with a sound that shook the very walls of the house, the mirror cracked. The crack that split the mirror was deafening, a violent sound that rang through the stillness of the room. The very air seemed to crackle with energy as the glass splintered, the fractures spiderwebbing outward from where Alice's hands had pressed against it. For a moment, everything paused. The hum of the house, the oppressive weight of the darkness. It all fell away, leaving her standing at the heart of the destruction she had caused. But the relief was short-lived. The crack in the mirror didn't just signify a break. It felt like the release of a dam, like something dark had been unleashed, something powerful. Alice stepped back, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps as the air around her grew thicker, colder. The pieces of the mirror seemed to glow for a brief moment, reflecting the dim light in sharp, jagged shards. The room felt like it was vibrating with an energy that made her skin crawl, a pull so strong that it almost felt like the mirror was alive, struggling to repair itself. "You can't stop it!" The woman's voice boomed from the reflection, now distorted in the cracked surface. The smile that had once been eerie and playful was now grotesque, stretched into a sinister grimace, the woman's eyes burning with an otherworldly fury. "You can't escape what you are." Alice's heart raced as the darkness in the room began to writhe, the shadows on the walls moving, twisting as though they were alive. The temperature dropped even further, and she could see her breath in the air, sharp and frigid. The house itself seemed to pulse its very foundation, shaking as the mirror crackled and groaned, its reflection distorting, as if it was trying to swallow her back into the glass. In a sudden, horrifying moment, Alice understood. The mirror wasn't just a window to another world. It was a trap. It had been waiting for her, using her curiosity, her vulnerability to pull her in. The reflection wasn't just an image. It was a part of something ancient, something tied to the very essence of the house. She had broken the mirror, But had she broken the curse? Or had she just unleashed something far worse? You cannot break what was never meant to be broken. The woman's voice echoed from the glass, the distortion in her tone making Alice's skin crawl. You are bound to me now, bound to this place, and you will never leave. Alice's body tensed every fiber of her being, screaming to run, to flee, but the air around her seemed to grow heavier, suffocating her with the weight of the words. The reflection in the shattered mirror shifted again, the image of the woman now filling the entire surface of the glass, her form stretching and distorting, as if she were trying to claw her way out to emerge into the room. Alice's eyes flicked toward the door. The hallway beyond was dark still, but she could feel something pulling her, something urging her to leave the room to escape the oppressive pull of the mirror before it was too late. But her feet wouldn't move. Her body was frozen, held captive by the presence in the mirror, as if she were chained to it by an invisible force. She could feel her pulse pounding in her throat, her fingers itching to reach for the pieces of the broken mirror, to pick up one of the shards and shatter the glass completely to end whatever this was. But she hesitated. The woman in the reflection reached toward Alice, her fingers growing longer, more grotesque, as they stretched through the glass. The air around Alice seemed to warp the edges of the room, bending like an illusion, and the whispering voices returned louder, now more insistent. You are mine. The woman growled, her voice no longer a whisper, but a roar. You belong to me, and you will stay here forever. Alice's vision blurred as the pressure in the room increased, her head spinning. The whispers, no, the screams were overwhelming now. They filled her mind, drowning out everything else, telling her that she had no choice, that she would never escape, that the house had claimed her. But she wouldn't give in. She couldn't. With a deep breath, Alice gathered every ounce of strength left inside her. She turned toward the broken mirror, her eyes fixed on the dark woman who was now halfway through the glass, her twisted fingers reaching for Alice's throat. The glass, despite being shattered, seemed to pulse and shimmer, as if the cracks were healing themselves, the curse trying to pull her back in. No. Alice whispered the word, shaking her lips. I will escape. Her hand shot out, not to the pieces of the glass, but to the doorframe. She shoved herself forward, using every last ounce of energy to fight the magnetic pull of the reflection. She felt herself moving for the first time since she had laid eyes on the mirror. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stepped away from the mirror, her body shuddering with the effort. The room seemed to fight her every step, the darkness trying to drag her back. But she pushed through her hands, reaching out, finally touching the doorframe, her fingers trembling as they gripped it for support. She took another step forward, and then another. The whispers in her head grew quieter, less urgent. The pressure that had been suffocating her began to lessen, the house's grip on her loosening. She was almost out, almost free, but as her foot crossed the threshold, a sharp crack rang out behind her, and she heard the woman's voice one last time, louder and more furious than ever. You will never escape me. Alice didn't look back. She ran, Alice's heart hammered in her chest, each breath a struggle as she sprinted down the narrow hallway, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the silence. She didn't dare look back. She could feel it, the presence from the mirror, the weight of the curse that had followed her from the moment she first laid eyes on it. It was behind her, trying to drag her back into its grip. But Alice refused to let it. Her body burned with exhaustion, her legs threatening to give out beneath her. But she pushed herself forward, the door at the end of the hall now within her reach. The walls seemed to close in the shadows, stretching toward her, like hands pulling her back, tugging at her body. But she couldn't stop. She couldn't. The whispers in her mind grew louder again, a chorus of voices, all chanting the same thing. You will never escape. You belong to me, But Alice's pulse raced as she reached the door, her hand desperately grabbing the handle, twisting it with all her remaining strength. The door swung open with a creak, and she stumbled through her body, collapsing onto the cold wooden floor of the room beyond. She gasped for air, her chest heaving, and for a moment the world around her seemed to still. She lay there in the darkness, the weight of her panic pressing on her chest. But the house the mirror no longer felt like it was closing in on her. The suffocating presence, the terror, seemed to fade just a little, and she allowed herself to take a shallow, calming breath. But she didn't feel safe. Not yet. Her eyes scanned the room, the dim light revealing familiar surroundings. This was her grandmother's old sitting room, the one she had inherited when she moved into the house. The antique furniture was the same as she remembered, dust-covered, but untouched by time. But there was something different, something off. The mirror was gone. Alice blinked. She had expected it to be in the corner of the room, just like it had always been, its cursed presence sitting quietly watching. But it wasn't there. The space where it had once stood was empty, the wall bare. For a moment, she thought she had finally escaped its pull, but the unease in her chest remained. The house was never truly empty. She could still feel the weight of its presence pressing on her, as if it was waiting for her to let her guard down just long enough for it to strike. The door slammed shut behind her, and Alice jumped, her pulse spiking once again. She turned, heart racing, but the room was still. The walls didn't shift. There was no eerie hum of energy in the air. It was quiet. Too quiet. She slowly stood up, her legs still trembling beneath her, her body aching from the tension of the last few hours. The silence was oppressive now, and the absence of the mirror made the room feel even more suffocating. Then she heard it, a faint scratching sound like fingernails against glass. Alice froze. It came from the other side of the room. Her heart skipped a beat as she slowly turned toward the noise. She could hear it more clearly now, faint but unmistakable, like something or someone was scratching at the wall. She knew that sound. It was the same sound she had heard before in the mirror, when the reflection had reached out toward her. The mirror wasn't gone. It was still here. Her breath hitched as she took a step toward the source of the noise. There in the corner of the room, behind the heavy velvet curtains that hung over the window, something gleamed in the dim light. She walked closer, her feet hesitant, as the scratching sound grew louder. The closer she got, the clearer it became, until she was standing right in front of the curtains. Her hand hovered above them, her fingers shaking, before she pulled them aside, revealing the wall behind them. And there it was, the mirror. But it wasn't the same. It was larger, its frame now covered in the same intricate carvings she had seen when she first cleaned it. But the symbols were different now, more defined, more alive. They seemed to shift before her eyes, as if they were changing, twisting into something darker, something that was watching her, waiting. Alice stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. The mirror wasn't just a reflection. It was an anchor, a portal to something that had been in her family for generations, something she couldn't fully understand. But one thing was clear. It wasn't finished with her. The reflection in the mirror shifted the image of the woman, the same woman now standing there staring back at Alice with that same malevolent smile. Her eyes were darker, more intense, filled with rage. The smile on her face was no longer playful or mocking. It was cruel, full of the kind of power that made Alice feel small, insignificant. "You can't escape me," the woman's voice whispered now, clearer, more commanding. "I am inside you. I have always been." Alice's breath caught in her throat. The voice was familiar, but it wasn't hers. It wasn't just the reflection talking anymore. The mirror was alive, feeding on her fear, feeding on her confusion. The room around her began to tremble, and Alice stumbled backward, her legs buckling under the pressure. The air grew thick again, the shadows closing in, pushing her back toward the mirror. She could feel it now, the pull. It wasn't just an object anymore. It was a force drawing her in, dragging her back to where it wanted her to be. "You belong to me." The woman in the reflection said, her voice low, filled with power. "Always." And Alice understood in that horrifying moment that the house, the mirror, the curse, it was all part of her now. She couldn't escape it. It was inside her. Always. But she would fight. Alice's mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest as the weight of the realization settled over her. She had been wrong. She had thought she could escape that by running from the mirror, from the house. She could somehow sever the connection between herself and whatever dark force had been waiting for her. But the truth was clearer than ever now. It wasn't just a curse. It was a part of her, an integral piece of her soul that had been lying dormant, waiting for the right moment to awaken. The room was alive with the sound of the woman's laughter, a low, echoing sound that seemed to reverberate in every corner. The mirror seemed to pulse with life, its reflection growing more vivid, the woman's figure becoming sharper, more defined. The shadows on the walls stretched toward her like reaching fingers, pressing her toward the mirror. The air felt thick with energy, heavy with the presence that had haunted her for so long. "You cannot escape me," the woman whispered. Again her voice, a soft, hypnotic lullaby that sent chills down Alice's spine. "You belong to me, Alice. You always have. You always will." Alice tried to move, to break free from the pull, but her legs felt heavy, as though the floor itself was holding her in place. Her breath quickened as she forced herself to focus, to fight against the overwhelming presence that was closing in on her. This wasn't the time to panic. She had to fight, with every ounce of strength left in her. Alice tore her eyes away from the mirror, refusing to let herself be consumed by the reflection by the woman. She had broken free before. She could do it again, but the room wouldn't let her go. The air was thick with the scent of something ancient, something that had never truly left the house. It was as though the walls themselves were alive, watching her, waiting for her to give in. She could hear the whispers again, growing louder, a chorus of voices that called to her, pulling her deeper into the grip of the mirror. "You are mine," they whispered. "We've always been waiting for you." Alice staggered back, her mind spinning, but then her eyes fell on the chair she had thrown at the mirror earlier. The broken shards of glass from the mirror still lay on the floor in a neat pile. Her fingers twitched, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't give up. She couldn't let this thing, this force, consume her. With a sudden surge of determination, Alice dashed toward the broken pieces, her legs unsteady as she knelt down. The glass shards glinted in the dim light, their edges sharp and deadly. She grabbed one, the jagged edge cutting into her palm as she gripped it tightly. The blood began to trickle from her hand, staining the shard a deep crimson. With a primal scream, Alice hurled the shard of glass at the mirror, her entire body shaking with the force of it. Time seemed to stretch the world around her, holding its breath. The shard hit the mirror with a sound, like a scream, and then nothing. For a moment, Alice thought she had missed. The mirror was intact, the reflection unchanged. The woman still stood there, smiling, her dark eyes gleaming with that insidious cold promise. But then the mirror shattered. The glass cracked in a violent explosion, the sharp shards scattering across the room like a storm of broken dreams. The reflection in the mirror fractured the woman's image, shattering into thousands of pieces. The walls shook, the ground trembled beneath her, and Alice felt the grip of the house, the mirror, finally beginning to loosen. For a second, the world was still suspended in a moment of fragile hope. The air was thick with the echo of the broken mirror. The woman's presence gone, vanished like smoke in the wind. Alice stood there, panting, her body trembling from the adrenaline, the blood from her hand dripping onto the floor. She hadn't just shattered the glass, she had shattered the curse. But as the room quieted, as the darkness began to recede, Alice felt something else stir in the silence. Something she hadn't expected, a presence. A faint, almost imperceptible pull in the air. Her heartbeat quickened again as the darkness in the room began to shift, swirling like a vortex, tightening, compressing around her. It wasn't over. The house was still here. A figure appeared at the edge of her vision, just beyond the shattered remnants of the mirror. It wasn't the woman not anymore. It was something different, something that made her skin crawl. The figure was tall and thin, its face a blur of shadows, the features shifting like it was constantly changing, flickering between forms. But Alice recognized it immediately. It was the house, the presence that had always haunted her. "You cannot escape me." The figure whispered, its voice deep and hollow, as though it came from the very walls themselves. "I am always with you. I am you," Alice gasped, stumbling back, her heart racing, as the figure began to step toward her, its shape becoming clearer. Its eyes were deep pools of darkness, endless and hungry. The air around it crackled, and the temperature in the room dropped even further, biting at her skin. The shadows in the room began to press in on her, suffocating her. The house, the force was drawing near, and she could feel the weight of it closing in on her again. It was never truly gone. It had always been here, waiting for her to let it back in. But this time, Alice wasn't going to give in. With one final scream, she shoved the figure back, the shard of glass still clutched tightly in her hand. She plunged it forward, driven by the desperate need to stop it, to push the darkness away, once and for all. And as the glass made contact, the house, the force seemed to explode in a burst of light, a blinding, searing flash that filled the room. Alice squeezed her eyes shut, the energy in the air, overwhelming, blinding her. When the light faded, the room was silent once more. Alice opened her eyes. The house was still, the mirror broken, the curse shattered. The presence, the house itself, was gone. And for the first time, Alice could breathe. Alice's body felt heavy, like the aftermath of an intense battle. She lay still, her eyes still closed, trying to absorb the overwhelming silence that had replaced the storm of dark energy that had consumed the room. She opened her eyes cautiously, scanning her surroundings. The room was the same, but something had shifted, something fundamental. The house, the mirror, the curse, they were all gone. But Alice felt a strange emptiness that lingered in the air, as though something had been severed. She stood slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her, and looked around the room. The remnants of the shattered mirror lay scattered across the floor, its sharp edges reflecting the dim light of the room in broken fragments. But the dark presence that had filled the space was gone. The oppressive weight that had pressed on her chest was lifted, replaced by a strange stillness. For a moment, Alice thought she could hear something faint at first, like a whisper just out of reach. She strained to listen, her heart pounding in her chest as she tried to catch the words. "It's not over." Alice froze. The voice was familiar, too familiar. Her pulse quickened as the realization hit her. It couldn't be. Her breath caught in her throat. The woman in the mirror, the curse, it was supposed to be gone. Wasn't it? "You can't escape." The voice whispered again, clearer now, echoing through the room. "You never will." The walls around her seemed to shift. The room itself felt like it was distorting, folding in on itself, as though the house were warping reality once more. Alice stumbled backward, her body tense with fear as the shadows in the corners of the room began to deepen, pulling together in thick, swirling tendrils. It wasn't over. The house, or whatever force had controlled it, was still here, You cannot leave." The voice continued, growing louder, its power rising like a tide, filling the room with an overwhelming sense of dread. "You're already mine." Her legs wobbled and Alice found herself backing toward the door, her heart pounding violently in her chest. She had to leave. She had to get out. Her hand grasped the doorknob, her fingers slick with sweat, but as soon as she touched it, a chilling gust of air swept through the room, slamming the door shut in front of her. The force of the wind knocked her back, and she landed hard on the floor, a sharp pain shooting through her body. She gasped for air, her heart racing as the shadows swarmed around her like a living thing. The house was alive. It was feeding on her fear, on her hesitation. She had made a mistake thinking it was over. She had thought that by breaking the mirror, she had broken the curse. But it was more insidious than that. The mirror had been a window, a connection, but the curse had always been tied to the house itself. The house was the curse. Alice's eyes darted around the room, her mind desperate for a solution, a way out. The shadows were closing in, and the whispers were becoming louder, more distorted. She had to act. She had to fight. "You cannot fight me." The voice whispered its words, seeping into her mind. "I am your past. I am your family. I am your blood. And you are mine." The shadows around her began to take shape, swirling together to form a dark, shifting figure. It was no longer just the reflection of the woman. It was something else, something that wasn't human. The air grew thicker, heavier, as the figure grew taller, its shape stretching, its form becoming more defined. It was coming for her. Alice's mind raced as she scanned the room for anything that could help her. Her eyes fell on the broken shards of the mirror scattered on the floor. The pieces glinted in the dim light, shards of glass, sharp enough to cut, sharp enough to defend herself. With trembling hands, Alice scrambled to her feet, her body shaking with fear, but she refused to let it consume her. She grabbed the closest shard, feeling its coldness against her skin, the sharp edge digging into her palm as she gripped it tightly. The house, the curse, it was all tied to this moment, and it would end here. It had to. She held the shard out in front of her, her hands trembling, but her gaze steady as she focused on the dark figure that was now standing before her. The shadows swirled around it, a mass of darkness that seemed to stretch beyond the walls, suffocating the room in an oppressive, choking grip. The figure's eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and its grin spread wide, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too monstrous. "You can't stop me," it growled, its voice low and menacing. "I am your past, Alice, and you are nothing without me." Alice took a step forward, her legs trembling, but her resolve steady. She knew the house knew the darkness that had shaped her, but she also knew one thing: it couldn't break her. Not anymore. "I am something," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the overwhelming whispers. "I am stronger than this." With that, she lunged at the figure, the shard of glass aimed directly at the heart of the darkness. The moment the shard of glass made contact with the figure, the room seemed to collapse in on itself. Alice's mind exploded with a sharp, piercing pain, as if the very air had turned to glass and shattered around her. The darkness screamed a horrible guttural sound that rattled her bones. The house groaned, its foundations trembling, as though it were alive, struggling against the force she had just unleashed. But Alice didn't stop. She pushed harder, her trembling hand forcing the shard deeper into the heart of the shadow, aiming for the core of the curse. The figure's form writhed, its edges curling and flickering like smoke. But as the glass punctured its center, a wave of energy exploded outward, the force sending Alice crashing backward against the wall. Her head hit the floor with a sickening thud, and for a moment, the world spun in a dizzying blur. Blood dripped from a cut on her forehead, but she didn't care. She forced herself to sit up, her body screaming in protest as she looked around half blind from the pain. The mirror shards had fallen scattered like broken pieces of a shattered soul, and the figure, the house's very essence, was beginning to dissipate its dark form, unraveling into the air like smoke. But it wasn't enough. Alice could feel it deep in her gut. It wasn't gone. The shadows in the room still clung to the corners, swirling and undulating with a sickening vitality, as though they were waiting to pull her back. And the woman's voice, the voice of the curse, lingered in her mind, growing louder, more insistent. "You cannot escape," the voice echoed, rising from every corner, from every shadow. "You will never be free. You will never break the chain." Alice gasped, her body shaking as the darkness continued to creep closer. Her reflection, the woman from the mirror, began to flicker once more, as if the curse was trying to pull her into the glass again. She could feel the weight of the house's malevolent presence, pressing in on her, dragging at her mind, at her soul. The figure in the mirror was no longer just a part of her. It had become an entity, a living nightmare that had no intention of letting her go. "I am part of you," the voice whispered again, softer now, more intimate. "I am your blood, your past, your family, and you can never escape me." Alice shook her head violently, clutching her temples in a desperate attempt to drown out the voice. It was all too much, the pressure, the suffocating presence of the house, the overwhelming force of the curse. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. It felt like the house was closing in on her, its walls, its shadows, its whispers, all of it merging into one dark, oppressive force. But there was something else now, a flicker of something inside her. It was small, a spark of defiance that refused to be extinguished. The woman in the mirror. The curse, it had been with her for so long, buried in the depths of her history, her family's history. It had tried to claim her, to drag her into its grip, to turn her into something else. But Alice was still here. She was still herself. "No," Alice whispered through clenched teeth, her voice weak but determined. "I won't let you take me." The shadow in the room seemed to pause, as though it had heard her, and the figure in the mirror flickered again. The woman's eyes, once filled with rage and malice, softened just for a moment. In that brief instant, Alice saw something else, something she hadn't expected. Regret. The figure's twisted form began to waver, its edges blurring, fading like smoke, dissipating in the wind. The shadows in the room flickered and began to pull away, retreating into the corners, leaving the room bathed in the dim light of the lamp. Alice's chest heaved with each breath, the weight of the presence lifting slowly, inch by inch. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't over. Alice could feel it deep in her soul. The house was weakening, but the curse had left its mark. It was in her now. It had always been in her. She pushed herself to her feet, her body aching with every movement, her mind screaming at her to stop, to give in. But she couldn't. She wasn't going to let it control her anymore. Alice turned her back on the mirror, the broken shards scattered on the floor behind her. She walked to the door, her hand trembling as it reached for the handle. For a second, she hesitated, unsure of what was waiting on the other side. Was this just another trick? Was she walking straight into another trap? Another layer of the curse that would consume her? But as she opened the door, a gust of fresh air filled her lungs, and she stepped into the hallway beyond. The house was quiet now. The whispers were gone. The darkness for the moment had receded. She wasn't free, not yet, but she had fought her way out of its grip. She had broken its hold, at least for now. Alice took a step into the hallway, and then another, her leg still trembling, but her resolve stronger than ever. The house wasn't done with her. She could feel it, but she wouldn't let it take her again. With every step she took away from the room, The presence seemed to fade just a little more. She wasn't sure where this road would lead, but she knew one thing: she would keep walking. She would keep fighting. She had to. The house had tried to make her part of it, to make her its prisoner, but it had failed, for now Alice was free. The silence of the house felt like a suffocating weight pressing down on Alice, but with each step she took down the dimly lit hallway, the air seemed to grow lighter. The oppressive feeling that had once smothered every corner of this house was starting to wane like the last breath of a storm passing over the sea. She didn't stop walking. She couldn't afford to. Every nerve in her body was still on edge, ready for the next shift, the next sudden change. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Alice allowed herself to exhale just a little. She reached the staircase, the wooden steps creaking under her weight as she made her way down each step, reminding her of the years she had spent trapped in this place, in the house that had been both her home and her prison. It had twisted her past, reshaped her memories, and now it was trying to consume her entirely. But not today. Not anymore. She had faced it. She had confronted the mirror, confronted the darkness within herself, and she had survived. The air downstairs was cooler, but it didn't feel as stifling. She passed the old portraits on the walls, their faces frozen in time, but they didn't seem to watch her as they once had. The house had always felt like it was alive, like it was watching her, listening to her every movement. But now the house felt empty, silent. Alice stopped in front of the living room door, the one room in the house that had always held the most memories for her. She hesitated for just a moment before opening it, stepping inside. The room was unchanged, the old furniture still arranged in the same way, the faint smell of old books and leather filling the air. But something about it felt different. The shadows were no longer oppressive. The room was still and calm, as if the house itself had released its grip. She walked over to the old bookshelf, her fingers lightly brushing the spines of the books, the familiar feel of them grounding her. She picked up a book that had always been her grandmother's favorite, the one she'd always read aloud to Alice when she was younger. She opened it to a random page, but the words seemed to blur in front of her eyes. She blinked, and they refocused the text clear again. "The light always wins," Alice whispered to herself, reading the old proverb that had once been her grandmother's mantra. "The light always wins." She smiled faintly, the words a small comfort, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always a way out. She had found hers. She had survived the mirror, survived the curse, and now she was standing here, in this room, free. The relief that filled her chest was overwhelming, but it didn't last long. As Alice closed the book and set it down on the shelf, she noticed something she hadn't before. There, at the far corner of the room, was an old wooden cabinet. It wasn't large, but it had always been there, tucked away out of sight, a piece of furniture she had never paid much attention to. Curious, she moved toward it, her footsteps soft against the wooden floor. She reached for the handle and tugged it open. Inside, there was nothing but darkness. At first, it seemed like it was empty, but when she peered in further, her eyes caught something, a small box tucked in the back, nearly hidden from view. Her hand hesitated over it. The box looked old, its wood weathered with strange symbols etched along its sides, much like the ones she had seen on the mirror's frame. Alice's heart skipped a beat as she recognized them. The same markings, the same curse. Her breath caught in her throat as she reached into the cabinet and pulled the box out. It was surprisingly light in her hands, the lid smooth under her fingertips. She held it there for a moment, unsure, but then a strange sense of inevitability washed over her. She had come this far. She had faced the house and its horrors. But what was this box? What could it possibly be? With trembling hands, Alice slowly opened it. Inside, there was nothing but a single object, a small round mirror, no bigger than the palm of her hand. Its frame was simple, unadorned, but the reflection that stared back at her was anything but. For a split second, she thought she saw the woman, the figure that had haunted her so long, staring back at her from the mirror's surface. But it wasn't just the reflection of the woman. There was something else, a flash of movement. Something was in the mirror with her. She gasped, her heart racing again. Her hand trembled as she held the small mirror closer, her breath catching in her throat as she stared at her reflection. But this time, it wasn't her own face. The reflection she saw wasn't just her. It was the woman from the cursed mirror. Yes, but it was twisted, warped, as though the mirror had become a portal, and the woman was reaching through it. "You should never have opened that box," the woman's voice whispered, echoing in her mind. Alice's hand jerked back, dropping the mirror onto the floor with a soft clink. It landed face up, the reflection still staring back at her, as if the woman was waiting for her to make the next move. She took a step back, her breath shallow, trying to calm herself, but the shadows in the room seemed to stretch again, creeping toward her like fingers, like hands reaching for her, pulling her back into the darkness she had thought she had escaped. The curse hadn't ended. It wasn't gone. It had followed her, slipped into the cracks she had overlooked, and now it was going to drag her back into the mirror, into the endless loop that had claimed so many before her. But Alice refused to let it. She wasn't done, not yet. With a determined breath, she reached for the mirror once again, her fingers brushing against its smooth surface. And with all the strength she could muster, she slammed it down onto the ground. The mirror shattered. But this time, something felt different. The mirror shattered with a deafening crack, the shards scattering across the floor like 1,000 splintered reflections. Alice stood there, her body trembling from the force of the act, her heart pounding in her chest. The moment the glass hit the floor, she expected the house, the presence, the curse to end, to vanish into nothingness like a bad dream. But as the last of the glass settled into place, a strange, suffocating silence filled the room. It wasn't over. The house was still alive. The air grew thick, almost viscous, as though the atmosphere itself had turned to molasses. Alice could feel it pressing in on her like an unseen force wrapping around her chest, squeezing the air from her lungs. The shadows in the room began to pulse again, undulating as though they were alive, creeping toward her with a hunger that made her skin crawl. The darkness wasn't just in the corners anymore. It was everywhere. "You cannot destroy me." The voice from the shattered mirror whispered its tone, distorted, echoing as if it came from all around her, seeping into her thoughts. "I am you, and you are mine." Alice's breath hitched. She staggered backward, the floor beneath her feeling like it was tilting. The walls seemed to stretch, growing taller, closing in on her. The room felt smaller, tighter, as though the house was shrinking around her. The fragments of the mirror on the floor glittered with an unnatural gleam, the glass now alive as if the very reflections had taken on their own consciousness. Her hand reached out instinctively, but her fingers were trembling, unable to grip the broken pieces. She was paralyzed by the weight of the presence that filled the room. The darkness was the house, and it was no longer something that could be locked away in a single object or shattered with one blow. It had become part of her, woven into her very essence. The air hummed with dark energy, and the whispers grew louder, almost deafening, now filling every corner of her mind. They weren't just words anymore. They were memories, voices from her past, her family, her grandmother, She could hear the warning she had once been told over and over again. "Beware the mirror, Alice." But it was too late. "You're too weak." The voice continued, its tone mocking venomous. "You'll never be free of me. Never." The walls began to close in on her, the house now bending and distorting, like the worst kind of dream, the kind where nothing is quite right, where everything is warped and out of place. The shadows stretched, twisting into figures she recognized. She could see them now, her family. They weren't fully formed, not entirely human, but their faces were there, their bodies, their hands reaching toward her. They weren't alive. They were ghosts, echoes of the curse. The house had taken them, twisted them, just as it had tried to do to her. But now she could see their eyes, those hollow, empty eyes locked onto her, with a depth of sorrow and pain. "We never left." Her grandmother's voice whispered, her face appearing among the shadows, her form barely visible in the dark. "We've always been here waiting for you to face the truth." Alice stepped back, her chest tightening with fear. The room was shifting around her, the walls narrowing, the shadows growing more substantial, more real. They were closing in, and she could feel the weight of it, the weight of her family's past, the weight of the curse that had haunted them for generations. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everything the house had ever consumed. "You cannot outrun it." Her grandmother's voice continued, now distant but clear. "It lives within you. It always has." The cold, suffocating presence of the house began to fill every inch of the room, and Alice knew deep in her soul that there was only one way out. She had to face it. She had to confront the darkness inside her, confront the truth of what had been buried in the house. She couldn't run anymore. She couldn't escape. She could feel the warmth of the shards of glass on the floor beneath her feet, the broken mirror pieces reflecting not just her own face, but the faces of her family, the faces of the shadows that had followed her. It wasn't just a reflection. It was a portal. The mirror had always been a doorway. "You will always be a part of me." The voice whispered, no longer a sound, but a pulse, a vibration in the very air around her. "Always." Alice clenched her fists, the glass digging into her palm as she fought against the pressure that threatened to crush her. She couldn't let it win. She couldn't let the house consume her, like it had consumed so many before her. With a scream, Alice hurled herself toward the center of the room, the broken mirror shards falling in every direction, catching the light and refracting it in all directions. The darkness, the whispers, the twisted figures, they all surrounded her, closing in. But she pushed through. She fought the house with everything inside her. The house trembled, the walls shaking violently as if they were struggling against her. But Alice held her ground. With every ounce of strength, she faced the reflection in the shattered glass, staring into the broken pieces that had once held the house's curse. And then, in one final desperate surge, she screamed, "I am free." For a moment, there was nothing. No whispers, no shadows, no house. And then the darkness began to dissolve. The world was silent. For a fleeting moment, the oppressive weight of the house, the endless darkness, and the suffocating whispers that had filled her mind faded into nothing. The trembling walls stilled, and the shadows that had once lurked in every corner of the room retreated. Alice stood there, her chest heaving, her mind reeling, as the silence stretched out around her, deep and pure. For the first time since she'd stepped into this house, since she'd discovered the cursed mirror, she felt as though she were standing in the calm after the storm. But it didn't last. The air around her began to thicken again, the silence growing heavier. The shadows on the floor began to stretch once more, inching toward her like a dark, creeping fog. Alice's heart skipped a beat as she realized what was happening. The house was regenerating. It wasn't gone. The curse had only been temporarily suppressed, not destroyed. The mirror, the reflection, it had always been a piece of the house, and the house was alive. Alive in ways Alice hadn't fully understood until now. The shadows began to twist and grow, converging at the center of the room. Alice's breath caught in her throat as the temperature dropped again, the chill creeping up her spine. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay, the familiar stifling odor that had haunted the house for so long. It wasn't over. Alice's legs trembled as she staggered backward, her gaze fixed on the growing mass of shadows that were coalescing in the center of the room. It was like watching a storm form from the inside out, a swirling, twisting vortex of darkness that seemed to pull at everything in the room, drawing the very light from the walls and ceiling. The figure began to take shape, not quite human, not quite anything, but something monstrous, something that defied description. Its eyes, no, not eyes voids, glowed a sickly, unnatural red, and its body seemed to pulse with energy, each movement sending tremors through the air. The shadows clung to it, twisting around its form like a cloak. Its mouth opened, and Alice heard a sound, not a voice, but a grating, scraping noise that felt like the scraping of nails on a chalkboard. The sound gnawed at her mind, filling it with a kind of dread she couldn't shake. "You cannot destroy me." The voice rasped, its tone jagged and sharp like glass shattering. "I am the house. I am the curse. I am everything that has ever been, everything that will be." The figure lurched forward, and Alice took an instinctual step back. Her heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing as she searched for a way to escape, to fight back. But the walls of the room were closing in again, the door to the hallway vanishing behind her as the shadows pressed tighter, wrapping her in their grip. "You are mine, Alice." The voice whispered now, filled with a strange sense of finality, as if it was speaking directly into her soul. "You always have been. You always will be." Her breath caught. She couldn't breathe. The pressure on her chest felt like a weight she couldn't escape, and her body trembled each step she took, growing more difficult, more suffocating. The shadows seemed to weigh her down, clinging to her, pulling her back toward the center of the room. "You cannot leave," the voice repeated. "There is no escape from what is inside you." Alice staggered, falling to her knees as the pressure in the room grew. The house's grip was closing and tightening, and with it, the curse seemed to engulf her, wrapping its tendrils around her mind, around her very being. Her fingers dug into the floor, trying to hold on to something, anything. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think, and then a single thought pierced the fog of fear and confusion that clouded her mind. The mirror. The cursed mirror had been the heart of it all. The reflections, the darkness, the woman, the house itself. It had always been tied to the mirror. The curse had drawn its strength from it. And when she had broken the mirror, she had thought the curse was gone, but it wasn't. It had simply been buried deeper. The mirror had been a doorway, a connection, and Alice had only torn a piece of it away. She had to destroy the heart. She had to finish it. With a strength she didn't know she still had, Alice forced herself to stand. The figure in front of her twisted and writhed, its form still incomprehensible, but the force it exuded was unmistakable. The shadows were alive, and they were closing in on her. But Alice refused to give up. She had faced the house before faced the curse, and she wouldn't let it win. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for anything that might help. Her gaze fell on the remnants of the mirror, the shattered glass scattered across the floor. The pieces had begun to glow faintly, their edges still sharp, but now pulsing with a dark, unnatural energy. It was the mirror. The curse was the mirror. And it was still here in the house in her mind. Without another thought, Alice lunged toward the pieces, her hand reaching for the largest shard. It was jagged sharp, its surface reflecting not her face, but the distorted image of the figure behind her, its glowing eyes locked onto her with a haunting intensity. "You cannot stop me!" The voice hissed, its tone dripping with malice. "You belong to me!" Alice slammed the shard into the ground, the sharp end embedding itself into the wooden floor with a sickening crunch. The figure froze its form, wavering like a mirage. The shadows recoiled, pulled back, as though they were being sucked into the glass, and for a brief heart-stopping moment, the room fell into silence. And then the house roared. The ground beneath Alice's feet trembled, the walls shaking violently as the house seemed to breathe, its very foundations cracking. The shadows on the walls began to spiral, twisting violently, as if trying to tear themselves free of some invisible force. "No!" The voice screamed a chorus of rage that shattered the silence. "You cannot escape." But Alice didn't stop. With every ounce of her strength, she pushed the shard deeper into the floor, pressing it harder and harder until the sharp edges splintered the wood beneath her. The mirror was fighting back, but she was stronger now. The house had underestimated her, and with a final desperate push, the shard broke. The ground shook one last time, and then silence. The room stood still. For a moment, Alice didn't dare move, her body tense with the aftermath of her final desperate push. The shards of glass were scattered across the floor, but the air had changed. Gone was the oppressive weight of the curse, gone was the suffocating darkness. The house had paused as though holding its breath, waiting for something, and then slowly it began to dissipate. The shadows that had once been so thick, so alive, seemed to pull away, vanishing into the walls, the corners, the air itself. The presence of the house, the entity that had haunted her, that had tormented her for so long, began to shrink. The walls, which had felt like they were closing in on her, seemed to open again, as though the house itself were exhaling, releasing her from its grip. Alice took a deep, shaky breath, her chest rising and falling as she stared at the floor, at the mirror shards still scattered around her. She could feel her heart pounding in her ears, but it wasn't the frantic rush of panic. It was relief. It was the slow, dawning realization that the battle was finally over. The darkness was gone. The silence that filled the room now was like a balm to her bruised spirit. The house had fought back, had tried to drag her deeper into its clutches, but she had won. She had destroyed it. The mirror that had bound her to its curse was broken, and with it, the house's power had finally faded. But just as the quiet settled in, Alice's thoughts wandered to the strange sense of emptiness that still clung to her, an unease that refused to leave her chest. She had freed herself from the mirror. She had freed herself from the house. But had she truly escaped? Her fingers brushed over the broken shards of the mirror, the sharp edges glistening in the dim light. The energy in the room had shifted, but there was still something unsettling in the air. She could feel the presence of something, not the house, but something else lurking just beneath the surface. Something that wasn't quite finished. Her eyes fell on the reflection of the broken glass. The shards, though shattered, still seemed to shimmer with an unnatural glow, their edges curling in a way that reminded her of the dark force that had once consumed her. For a brief second, she thought she saw something, a face, but it wasn't hers. It was a woman's face, the same one that had haunted her from the mirror. Her heart skipped a beat, but this time the face was different. It wasn't angry. It wasn't malevolent. It was sad. Alice felt a chill run down her spine as the woman's reflection seemed to reach out from the shattered pieces of glass. Her expression was soft, her eyes filled with sorrow, but there was something in her gaze that was familiar and comforting. The woman's lips parted as though she was about to speak, but no words came. Instead, Alice heard it, a soft, barely audible whisper in her mind, as though the woman's voice was hers. "You're free," the voice whispered, a final gentle release. "You have always been. You were never trapped." Alice's breath caught in her throat. The woman's face in the glass shimmered again, and for a split second, it looked like her grandmother, like someone who had been part of her family. The curse, the house, it hadn't just been a force trying to drag her under. It had been a part of her bloodline, her family's past, and she had unknowingly carried it with her, bound to it in a way she hadn't fully understood. And now that bond had been severed, the shadows which had once crowded around her began to dissolve completely, the dark energy lifting like fog in the morning sun. The house no longer felt alive. It no longer felt like a living, breathing entity. It felt empty, silent. The weight was gone. Alice staggered to her feet, still unsure if what she had seen was real. Her mind was still reeling from everything that had happened, from the terror she had faced, the house's curse, and the mirror. But she could feel it now, the pull, the connection to her past, the dark force that had haunted her family for generations. It had finally been broken. She stood there for a long moment, taking slow, measured breaths before slowly turning toward the doorway. She stepped forward, the house now eerily quiet, its once oppressive presence now non-existent. She made her way to the front door, and as her hand touched the doorknob, she felt a final release. The weight of the curse lifted completely. She could feel the cold grip of the house evaporate, and for the first time, she felt truly free. But as Alice stepped out of the house, the door closing softly behind her, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't just leaving the house behind. She was leaving something else too. A piece of herself, a part of her family's history, had been tied to this place. The darkness had followed her, but now she had broken free. As she walked away from the house, Alice turned once more to look at it, standing there in the quiet night. The moonlight bathed the house in a soft glow, and for the first time she saw it for what it was. Just a house that had once been alive with darkness, but now just a house that could no longer claim her. With one final breath, Alice turned and walked away, knowing she had escaped not just from the house, but from the shadow of the curse that had followed her for so long. The road ahead wasn't clear, but it was hers to walk, and she would walk it free. Alice walked away from the house, her steps slow at first, tentative, as if she were waiting for the ground beneath her feet to shift again, as though the house might still reach out to claim her. But as the minutes passed and the house receded into the distance, she began to feel the weight of her past lift, replaced by a strange sense of peace. It wasn't freedom yet. It couldn't be. There was still the haunting, the shadows that clung to her memories of the house and its curse lingering like smoke in the air. But she was free. At least she felt free. She reached the edge of the forest surrounding the house and stopped to look back one last time. The moonlight cast a pale glow on the structure, its once oppressive silhouette now standing still and silent. For the first time, Alice wasn't afraid. The house no longer felt alive. It no longer held its breath, watching her, waiting for her to fall into its grasp again. It was just a house now. Just a house. And that's when she heard it. A faint sound like a whisper. But no, this was something different. A low hum vibrating from the direction of the house. It was almost imperceptible at first, but it grew louder as she stood there, her breath quickening. Her heart slammed against her ribs, the familiar sense of unease rising in her throat. She turned toward the house again, her hand instinctively reaching for the weight of a shard of glass that wasn't there. The air felt thick, heavy again, as though the darkness had followed her just beyond the edges of her vision. She could feel it. She could feel it. That presence, that thing she had fought for so long, it wasn't finished with her. The whispers were back. The house wasn't gone. It was just lying in wait. It had never truly left. "You thought you could escape." The voice from the mirror hissed louder now, like a vibration under her skin. "You thought you could break free, but you cannot. Not yet. You are still mine." Alice's breath hitched, but she didn't turn back. She couldn't. She wouldn't. But the voice, the presence was growing, expanding, reaching for her. She could feel it in the air, in her very soul, the way the darkness felt like it was pulling her back. Her feet moved before her mind could catch up. She had to get away. She had to keep moving. But where could she go? She hadn't known it then, but the house had never truly let her go. It had been inside her with her ever since she first laid eyes on that cursed mirror. It was a part of her. Her past, her bloodline. Her family had always been tied to it. Alice had been running from it, but she couldn't outrun herself. The house had always been there waiting. The shadows seemed to grow, reaching toward her, pulling her back. But Alice fought. She pushed herself forward, forcing herself to move, to keep walking away. She couldn't let it win. Not again. The path ahead was shrouded in the kind of fog she hadn't seen in years. It was cold, eerie, and clung to the ground like a living thing. The trees, tall and looming, appeared like twisted figures, their branches reaching out like fingers clawing at the sky. Alice's breath quickened, but she refused to stop. She had to keep moving. Her mind raced. She didn't know where to go, but she knew one thing for certain: the curse hadn't finished with her. It wasn't done. The house wasn't over. And neither was she. But in that moment she realized something. She didn't have to face this alone. For the first time in what felt like forever, Alice stopped running. She looked around at the fog, the oppressive, silent forest surrounding her. She was scared, terrified even. But she wasn't going to be a prisoner anymore. "I'm not running anymore," Alice whispered, her voice shaking but firm. As if on cue, a gust of wind stirred the air, and the fog seemed to part just slightly. There was a figure standing in the distance, not far ahead, a silhouette against the pale moonlight. It was too far to see clearly, but Alice felt drawn to it. There was something familiar about it, someone familiar. Her heart skipped a beat as she took a hesitant step toward the figure, the fear that had gripped her loosening just enough to allow curiosity to take over. And as she moved closer, the figure slowly became clearer. It was a woman, a figure from her past. "Grandmother," Alice whispered in disbelief, her voice catching in her throat. The woman's form remained still. Her back turned to Alice, but the energy around her felt comforting. It felt like the remnants of the love Alice had once known, the gentle presence of her grandmother's warmth that had always been there when she was a child. "Grandmother," Alice repeated, her voice stronger. This time the words desperate for an answer. The woman turned, her features now clearer in the moonlight. It was her grandmother standing before her, smiling with kindness. Her eyes were soft, filled with love, but there was something else in her expression. Something sad. "You've come far, Alice," her grandmother said softly, her voice carrying a calm that soothed Alice's racing heart. "But there is still more you need to understand. There is still much you must face." Alice stepped closer, her chest tight, the weight of her grandmother's words settling on her like a heavy cloak. "What is this? What is going on?" Alice asked, feeling her heart beat faster as the fog began to swirl around her again. "I don't understand. The house, the curse. It's not over, is it?" Her grandmother's smile faded, and she nodded slowly. "No, it's not over, Alice. The house has always been a part of you. But there is something else, something that can help you. You are not alone. There are others who know this house, who know its power. Alice's breath hitched. Who? The woman stepped forward, her figure dissipating into the fog, her voice trailing behind her. You have always had the strength to face this, Alice, but you need to find the others, and together you will destroy the house once and for all. Alice's heart thundered in her chest. The woman was gone, the fog closing in around her, but the words lingered. The weight of them. Find the others. The curse hadn't just been passed down through her bloodline, it had spread. There were others who had been touched by the house, by the mirror, by the same dark power that had haunted her family. And now Alice was ready to confront it. The fog wrapped around Alice like a cloak, but her mind was ablaze with her grandmother's words. Find the others. The idea clung to her like a whisper she couldn't escape. For so long, Alice had believed she was the only one affected by the curse, the only one caught in the house's dark web. But now, it seemed the house had touched more lives, more souls, than she could have ever imagined. There were others who had been touched by the same darkness, and together, they would destroy the house once and for all. Her breath quickened as she turned her feet, moving before her mind could catch up. The cold fog swirled around her, twisting the forest into a labyrinth of shadows. But Alice pushed through each step forward, pulling her closer to something she didn't fully understand but knew she had to do. The house had been defeated, but it was still a part of her, inside her bloodline, inside her family, buried deep within her. It would not let her go. And now, she needed to confront the rest of it. The wind howled in her ears, whipping the trees around her like wild, restless spirits. She stumbled over a patch of uneven ground, her heart racing as she heard something behind her. A footstep, a rustle of movement. She whipped around her hand instinctively, reaching for the broken shard of the mirror that had once been her weapon. But nothing was there. The forest was still. The darkness was quiet. Too quiet. She forced herself to breathe. Focus. I'm not alone. The thought clung to her, feeding her resolve. Her grandmother's presence had been real, her words true. And she had been right. Alice was not alone. There were others just like her, touched by the house, by the curse. They had to be out there. Somewhere. But where? Alice's mind raced with possibilities. There had to be a place where these others had gathered, where they had fought or hidden. Had they been trying to end the house's hold as well? Was there some sort of resistance? An alliance of souls who had all felt the weight of the curse? The fog thickened, and Alice felt an uncomfortable chill crawl up her spine. The shadows seemed to pulse with energy, as though someone was watching her, waiting for her to make a mistake. The air felt too still, too oppressive, and she could almost hear the faint whispers again, just beyond her hearing. Find the others, her grandmother's voice whispered in her mind. The house is never done. You are the key. The words seemed to echo louder now, filling her thoughts, drowning out everything else. The key. What did that mean? What key? She wasn't the only one who could fight this. Could she? She had to find the others. But where? How? Her legs ached with exhaustion, but she pushed herself forward, the fog growing heavier with each step. She had to keep moving. There was no turning back now. Suddenly, through the dense fog ahead, she saw a flicker of light. A soft, warm glow that stood out against the cold, dreary landscape. Her heart leaped in her chest as she pushed forward, the pull of the light drawing her like a magnet. As she approached, the fog began to thin, and she could see the outline of a building. It was an old, rundown structure, hidden deep in the woods, its windows dark and silent, but the light was coming from somewhere within. Alice hesitated for a moment, the hairs on the back of her neck standing up. There was something about this place, something familiar and yet foreign. It wasn't the house, but it was tied to it, connected in ways she didn't yet understand. The door to the building creaked as she pushed it open, the smell of dust and decay overwhelming her senses. But as she stepped inside, she was met with an unexpected warmth. The light she had seen from the outside filled the room, coming from a circle of candles arranged in a large pattern on the floor. At the center of the circle was a small, intricately carved box. It was wooden, ancient, covered in symbols that Alice instantly recognized, the same symbols from the mirror from the house. The box hummed with a quiet energy, and Alice could feel it in her bones, vibrating through the air like an electric pulse. She stepped closer, her hand hovering over the box, unsure of what to do. Her breath caught in her throat as she felt a presence behind her. Turning slowly, Alice's eyes locked onto a figure standing in the doorway. She froze, her heart racing as she saw the person who had entered. It was a man tall and thin with dark eyes that seemed to see through her through everything. His face was familiar in an odd, unsettling way, like a half-remembered dream. He stepped closer, his movements measured and purposeful, as though he had been waiting for her to arrive. "You found it?" The man said, his voice soft, but filled with an undeniable weight. "I knew you would." Alice took a cautious step back, her heart pounding. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "What is this place?" The man smiled faintly, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "I'm someone who has been waiting for you, Alice. Someone who knows the truth about the house. About you." Alice's breath caught in her throat. The man's words struck her like a bolt of lightning. She had known somewhere deep down that she wasn't the only one. But hearing it out loud, hearing the truth, made her feel exposed, vulnerable. The man stepped forward, his eyes locked on hers, and in that moment, Alice knew. He had been waiting for her to find this place, for her to reach this point. He knew the house, its curse, and the key that Alice was destined to unlock. And he wasn't the only one. "This is the beginning," the man whispered, his voice low and steady. "There are others, Alice, and together we will end this." Alice took a slow, shaky breath, her mind racing with everything she had learned. The house was still a part of her, but she wasn't alone. She had found the others, and now the real battle was about to begin. Alice stood in the doorway, her heart racing as the man's words echoed in her mind. There are others. She wasn't alone, not anymore. The thought both comforted and terrified her. For so long she had thought she was the only one cursed, the only one who had felt the house's grip on her life, its dark influence pulling at her every step. But now, standing before this stranger, this person who clearly knew more than he was letting on, she realized that her battle was just beginning. She had broken the mirror, destroyed the curse, but the house was alive, and it wasn't done with her. The man stepped further into the room, the faint glow of the candles casting shadows across his face, making his features seem even more intense. His eyes, deep and black, locked onto hers, and Alice felt an odd mix of unease and recognition. It was as though she had seen him before, or felt him buried deep within her subconscious. "You've come here looking for answers," the man said softly, his voice carrying a calm weight. "But there's something else you need to understand first. The curse, the house. It's not just an object, Alice. It's an entity, something older than your family, older than the house itself. It's been feeding off of your bloodline for generations." Alice's breath caught in her throat, and she felt the room suddenly grow colder. Her mind raced, pieces of the puzzle beginning to fall into place. but it felt like a terrible weight was settling on her chest, a feeling of dread that grew with every word this man spoke. Your family. My family. The man continued, his voice steady, but laced with a sorrow Alice couldn't place. They were part of it, Alice. They created the mirror, bound it to the house. They thought they could control it, but the mirror was never meant to be controlled. It was never meant to be used. Alice stepped back instinctively, her mind spinning. The mirror. It had always been the key, the cursed object, the gateway. She had known it. But to hear that her family had created it, the weight of that revelation hit her like a physical blow. Her ancestors, the very people she had come from, had bound this darkness to their bloodline. And now it was reaching for her, pulling at her in ways she didn't fully understand. Who are you? Alice managed to whisper, her voice, barely audible, shaking with the weight of the truth that was beginning to unfold. Why are you here? The man gave a sad smile, his eyes flickering with a mixture of pity and something darker. I'm here because I've been waiting for you, Alice. I'm part of your family's history too, though not in the way you think. My name is Daniel, and I know what you're up against. But you're not the first to try and break free from the house. There have been others before you. Alice's heart skipped a beat. Others? Yes, Daniel replied, his voice low and steady. Others who tried to destroy the mirror, tried to end the curse. But the house, it's always been there waiting. And each time someone thought they had broken it, the darkness returned stronger, more insidious. You see, Alice, the house is a part of something much larger, much more dangerous. And the mirror, the one you destroyed, it was just the first piece. Alice felt the floor beneath her feet shift, as though the very ground were beginning to move. The shadows in the room seemed to swirl around her, drawing closer, their edges sharp and insistent. The air was thick, with something she couldn't name, something ancient and alive, and it made her skin crawl. It was the house, the entity, it was calling to her again. Daniel took a step toward her, his presence suddenly overwhelming. I've been here for years, watching, waiting. My family, like yours, was bound to the house. They didn't create the curse, but they fed it just as your family did. We've all been part of this, Alice, and now you have to face the truth. The house, it feeds on your bloodline, your family, and it has been for centuries. Alice's head spun as she took a step back, her hands trembling. But I broke the curse, she said, her voice rising with desperation. I broke the mirror. I faced the house. It's gone, isn't it? No, Daniel said, his tone sharp. The house never leaves. You can't destroy it, but you can stop it. You can close the door. That's what the others before you tried to do. And they failed. But maybe you're different. Maybe you can do what they couldn't. Alice swallowed hard, the weight of Daniel's words settling over her like a blanket of ice. She had thought she was free. She had believed that destroying the mirror would end it all, that the curse would finally be broken, and she could move on with her life. But now, standing in this strange room with Daniel, the echoes of the house's haunting presence still clinging to her, she knew it wasn't that simple. But how? Alice asked, her voice cracking. How do I stop it? How do I close the door? Daniel gave her a long, searching look. You'll need to go to the heart of the house, the true heart. It's buried deep beneath the walls, beneath the very foundations. There's a place hidden in the cellar where the house's power is strongest. If you can reach it, if you can destroy it from the inside, then you can stop the house for good. Alice's pulse quickened, a sense of urgency rising in her chest. She had no time to waste. She had to do this. The house had to be stopped. The darkness couldn't keep claiming her family, couldn't keep feeding off them. This was her chance to end it once and for all. But as she glanced around the room, she felt the shadows stirring again, the whispering voices filling her mind once more. You can't escape. Alice shook her head, pushing the fear aside. She wasn't alone anymore. She had Daniel, and together they could end this. With a deep breath, Alice squared her shoulders, looking back at him. Let's go. And with that, they turned and walked toward the door, the fog of the forest swirling around them as they stepped back into the unknown. The battle wasn't over yet. The path ahead of them was cloaked in darkness, the forest pressing in on them as though the very trees were watching their every step. Alice's heart pounded in her chest, the cold air stinging her skin. Daniel walked beside her, his presence an anchor in the heavy silence that enveloped them. He didn't speak, his gaze fixed ahead, his steps deliberate and confident. Alice, on the other hand, felt the weight of every step they took, the shadows around them growing heavier, denser. The house loomed in the distance, its dark outline barely visible against the starless sky. The closer they got, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, the air thick with the memories of everything that had transpired within its walls. Alice could feel the pull of it, the tug at the edges of her mind, as though the house was calling to her, reminding her that it had never truly let go. Is it always like this? Alice asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The words felt heavy, like they were too much to say aloud, but she needed to know. Daniel's gaze flickered to her, his eyes dark and intense. It has a way of following you, especially if you're part of its bloodline. His voice was low, almost reverent, as if he too was haunted by the house's grip. It doesn't let go easily. It never has. Alice nodded, the fear in her chest growing with every step they took closer to the house. The shadows seemed to press in on them from all sides, the weight of the curse surrounding them like a thick fog. Her mind raced with the questions she couldn't answer, with the dark possibilities she didn't want to confront. Could they really stop it? Could they really close the door that had been opened so long ago? But there was no turning back now. They reached the front door of the house, its wooden surface cracked and weathered, the edges frayed with age. The wind howled through the trees, sending a chill through Alice's bones. The house stood silent before them, its dark presence like a living thing, watching them, waiting for them to enter. Alice's hand hovered over the doorknob. She could feel the house's power resonating in the air, pressing on her chest, pushing her to enter. It was almost as though the house was alive, aware of them, aware of her. She hesitated, her fingers trembling as they touched the cold metal. But Daniel's steady hand on her shoulder reminded her that she wasn't alone. She wasn't facing this darkness by herself. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice calm, though she could hear the quiet tremor of anxiety beneath it. Alice took a deep breath, nodding. "I have no choice." With that, they pushed the door open. The air inside the house was thick with dust, the scent of mildew and decay heavy in the stillness. The shadows inside the hallway stretched long and thin, as if they had been waiting for her return. The faint creak of the house's wooden beams echoed through the silence, and Alice felt an unsettling sense of déjà vu, as though she had been here before, as though she had walked this very path in another lifetime. The walls seemed to close in around her, their oppressive weight pressing on her mind. Daniel stepped forward, his footsteps silent in the dark, but Alice could feel the pull of the house's power intensifying with every step they took deeper into its heart. The door to the cellar was just ahead, but she knew it wasn't the door that would get them to the heart of the curse. It was what lay beneath that would determine whether they succeeded or failed. "Is it down there?" Alice asked, her voice barely audible as she glanced at Daniel. He didn't answer immediately, his eyes scanning the darkness. The silence in the air felt like a living thing, heavy and unyielding. "Yes," he said, his voice grim. "It's the only way to reach the heart of it. The house. It's not just the building, Alice. It's the place where the curse began. But to end it, we need to destroy what was buried below." Alice nodded, her body tense as she approached the stairs leading down to the cellar. The steps creaked under her weight, the noise somehow louder than it should have been, reverberating through the silence. She could feel the darkness around them pressing against her skin, seeping into her mind, trying to twist her thoughts, make her doubt herself, make her afraid. The further they descended, the colder it became. The temperature dropped so sharply that Alice could see her breath in front of her misting in the air. The air was heavy with the scent of earth, of something ancient, something forgotten. When they reached the bottom of the stairs, the cellar stretched out before them in an eerie, almost unnatural quiet. The walls were lined with shelves, their contents covered in dust long forgotten. But in the center of the room there was a stone altar, ancient and dark, the symbols carved into it barely visible in the dim light. The very sight of it made Alice's stomach twist, as if something alive was waiting for them there. "This is it," Daniel said, his voice almost reverent as he stepped forward. "This is where it all began." Alice stepped closer, her heart pounding in her chest as she examined the altar. The symbols carved into the stone were familiar now, the same ones she had seen on the mirror on the frame. The same symbols that had connected her family to this curse. She could feel the power emanating from the altar like a dark, pulsing energy that filled the room. It wasn't just a place, it was a source, the heart of the house, the very heart of the curse. Alice could feel it. The pull, the ancient energy that had been feeding off her family's bloodline for so long. She could feel it pulling at her, wrapping its dark tendrils around her, urging her to fall into the trap. The house had always been waiting for her to return, waiting for her to come to this place. Daniel stopped beside her, his gaze fixed on the altar. "We need to destroy it. This is where the house's power originates. If we destroy this, the curse will be broken." Alice hesitated. "How?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a small vial filled with a dark liquid. It shimmered in the dim light, swirling as though it were alive. "Fire," he said quietly. "We burn it. The liquid is a catalyst. It will trigger the destruction, but only if we set it right." Alice's gaze flickered to the vial, her mind racing. Fire. She didn't fully understand how, but it felt right. They had to destroy the source of the curse, the heart of it. She could feel the darkness rising again, pushing at the edges of her thoughts, urging her to stop, to turn back. But she wouldn't. She couldn't. With a steady hand, Alice took the vial from Daniel, feeling the weight of it in her palm. She stepped forward, her heart pounding with the weight of what she was about to do. And then with a deep breath, she poured the liquid onto the altar. The reaction was instantaneous. The moment the dark liquid hit the stone altar, the room seemed to breathe a low, deep rumble that sent a shiver through Alice's body. The air around her thickened, swirling in currents like an invisible storm pulling at her clothes, her hair. The floor beneath her feet trembled, and the shadows in the corners of the cellar seemed to pulse like they were alive, twisting with dark energy. Alice took a step back, her breath catching in her throat as the altar began to glow with an eerie light, the symbols carved into the stone illuminating with a sickly green hue. The walls seemed to shift, the cellar expanding and contracting, as though the very foundation of the house was reacting to the ritual they had just begun. The temperature in the room dropped sharply, and Alice could feel her fingers growing numb, the chill creeping into her bones. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she stood her ground. This was it, the moment that could break the curse, end the house's hold on her and on her family. Daniel stepped forward beside her, his gaze locked on the altar, his face tense with determination. "It's working," he muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible over the growing hum of energy in the room. "But it won't be easy. The house will fight us." As if on cue, the shadows in the cellar began to stretch and twist, rising from the floor like a living cloud swirling in the air around them. The temperature dropped further, and Alice could feel the presence of the house, the entity that had controlled everything for so long, pushing against her, fighting back with a fury she hadn't anticipated. "Stay close," Daniel warned, his voice firm. "Don't let the shadows pull you in. They want to take you back to the mirror, to their version of you. Don't let them." Alice nodded, though her mind was racing. She could feel the darkness closing in on them, its tendrils reaching toward her, trying to pull her into its grasp. She had faced the mirror, faced the house's influence on her life, but now it was real in a way that made her heart race with terror. The shadows seemed to know her, to understand her deepest fears. She could see faces flicker in the dark, twisted images of her family, her grandmother, her parents warped their features, shifting between familiar and monstrous. But Alice refused to be pulled back. She had made it this far, and she wasn't about to give in now. The altar continued to pulse with dark energy, its glow intensifying as the house fought to retain its power. The walls seemed to close in tighter, the darkness thickening with each passing second. The shadows grew more solid, more tangible, as though they were becoming real. Alice could feel the weight of them pressing against her chest, a suffocating force that threatened to crush her. "You can't destroy me," a voice hissed from the shadows, its tone low and guttural. "You are me. You belong to me." Alice's breath quickened as the voice echoed through the room, vibrating in her bones. She could hear it in her mind, in her soul, the house's voice, the force that had controlled her, that had fed on her bloodline for generations. It wasn't just trying to kill her. It was trying to consume her. She could feel it clawing at her thoughts, pulling at her weaknesses, trying to break her resolve. "Don't listen to it," Daniel said, his voice cutting through the whispers like a knife. "It's trying to get inside your head. You have to stay strong." Alice nodded, forcing herself to take a deep breath to clear her mind. She had to focus. This was the end. This was where it all ended. The house's power was in the altar, and she had to destroy it. With a trembling hand, she reached into her jacket, pulling out the small vial of liquid. The shadows around her seemed to grow, but Alice held firm, taking another step toward the altar. She could feel the house fighting her, its power rising, but she didn't stop. She poured the remaining liquid over the altar, and the room seemed to convulse with a terrible energy. The shadows recoiled, their forms twisting and screeching in agony, but Alice didn't stop. She stepped forward, her heart pounding as the air around her thickened with a suffocating pressure. She raised her hand high above her head, gripping the shard of glass, the same shard that had broken the mirror, the shard that had once been a weapon of destruction. She brought it down onto the altar with all her strength, her whole body trembling from the force of it. The moment the shard made contact with the stone, the entire house seemed to shake like it was coming apart at the seams. The ground beneath her feet trembled, the walls groaning with the pressure of something ancient, something alive breaking free. The darkness around them roared in fury, the shadows flaring with violent energy, and then silence. The room went completely still. The air, once thick with the force of the house's power, was now empty, devoid of the oppressive weight that had filled the space. The shadows that had once reached toward Alice, pulling at her mind, pulling at her soul, were gone. The altar, the heart of the curse, had shattered with the force of the final blow. Alice stood still, her breath shaky as she scanned the room. The fog, the shadows, the twisting darkness, it was gone. The house had stopped fighting. She had done it. She had destroyed the heart of it. For a moment, there was nothing but the quiet of the cellar, the stillness that spread through the house like a suffocating blanket. Alice's heart slowly began to slow, and she exhaled a shaky breath. It was over. The house, the curse, had been broken. But then deep in the pit of her stomach, she felt it. A tremor, a shift. The house wasn't done with her. It wasn't over. She wasn't free yet. The tremor rippled through the floor, its intensity shaking Alice to her core. The weight that had momentarily lifted from her chest now returned with even greater force, pressing in on her, as the walls seemed to groan, vibrating with the fury of the house. The shadows, though gone from the walls, seemed to pool around her feet, swirling in a slow, hypnotic dance. The air was thick again, heavy with a presence. She couldn't shake a presence that had not been fully defeated. Alice's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped back, her body moving instinctively away from the altar, away from the center of the room. She could feel it. The house was still alive. The energy that had once pulsed through the walls, the echoes of its dark power, had not vanished. It was still there underneath the surface, ready to burst forth again. Daniel stood beside her, his eyes scanning the room, his expression hard and unreadable. He had seen this before. He knew the house. He knew its tricks. But even he who had waited in this cursed place for so long seemed to sense the shift in the air. "It's not over," Alice whispered, her voice trembling but steady with the realization that the house wasn't done with them yet. "It's still here." Daniel's gaze flickered toward the altar, which now seemed to be reforming. The dark energy that had been released from the vial of liquid was starting to build again, gathering in the air like a storm ready to break. He stepped forward, his movements swift, his hands moving to the wall beside them, tracing the cold stone with practiced ease. "Something's wrong," he muttered under his breath, his fingers brushing the symbols that still lingered on the stone, barely visible to Alice. The house doesn't just release its hold. It won't let go that easily. Alice's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "That liquid, the catalyst, it wasn't enough." Daniel said, his voice quiet, but filled with an edge of fear that Alice hadn't heard before. "The house has a final layer, a core, that was never meant to be reached. Destroying the altar only weakened it, but there's one more step to breaking the curse completely." Alice felt her stomach drop. "What step? What do we have to do?" Daniel's gaze met hers, his eyes dark and full of knowing. "We need to cut the connection. The house is tied to the very earth beneath it. The foundation is cursed bound to the house's power. If we don't sever it from the ground, it will always find a way back." A chill ran down Alice's spine. The foundation. It was all connected. The house, the curse. The house had become a part of the very land, a piece of the earth itself. And now they had to sever that bond. "Where is it?" Alice asked, her voice urgent, as the air seemed to tighten around them, the weight of the house's presence growing heavier by the second. Daniel didn't answer immediately, his eyes flicking to the far wall of the cellar, where a small hidden door stood slightly ajar, covered in dust and cobwebs. It looked forgotten, like it hadn't been opened in decades. His expression darkened. "There," he said quietly. "The entrance to the foundation, the last step." Alice nodded without hesitation, moving toward the door, her feet light, despite the dread in her chest. She couldn't stop now. They had come too far, and this was the final moment. She had to break free. She had to destroy everything the house was. She pulled the door open with a creak that echoed in the cellar, the heavy air pressing against her, as if the house were resisting, trying to hold on to her. Beyond the door, was a narrow, winding staircase leading downward into darkness. The temperature dropped even further as Alice descended, the air growing cold and stagnant. The shadows seemed to grow darker here, deeper, like they were swallowing the light, pulling everything into their grip. Alice could feel the house's heartbeat beneath her feet. It was like a low thrum in the earth, deep and steady, as though the house was alive, as though it were breathing, pulsing with a dark energy that had been alive for centuries. The deeper they went, the heavier the air became, until it felt like she was walking through a tomb, surrounded by the weight of history, of death, of everything the house had consumed. When they reached the bottom of the stairs, Alice's eyes strained in the darkness, but the flicker of a dim light in the distance guided her. The small chamber stretched out before them, the walls cold stone, slick with damp. And there in the center of the room was what Alice had been searching for, the core of the house's power. It wasn't an altar this time. It wasn't a symbol. It was a stone pedestal, ancient and cracked, its surface covered in more symbols, more runes, pulsing with an eerie, sickly green light. The floor around it was covered in a dark, sticky substance, and the air was thick with a heavy, oppressive energy, like the very earth beneath them was vibrating with the house's will. "Is this it?" Alice asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The fear she had pushed back for so long was rising again, thick in her throat, but she knew she couldn't falter now. Daniel nodded grimly. "This is where it all started. The foundation, the core. This is the last link. If we destroy it, we destroy the house completely." Alice took a step toward the pedestal, but her hand hovered over it, hesitant. The energy was strong here, stronger than anywhere else in the house, and it was alive. It was watching her. She could feel it in her very bones. "Do it," Daniel urged, his voice low but filled with the weight of years of waiting, of being trapped in this curse. "Before it's too late." Alice nodded. She had no choice. She raised her hand, ready to strike, ready to sever the final connection between the house and the earth. And as her hand came down, the world seemed to shudder. The moment Alice's hand made contact with the stone pedestal, a violent surge of energy shot through her, unlike anything she had ever felt. It was as though the very earth beneath her feet was trembling in agony, its power fighting against her, pushing back with a force that threatened to swallow her whole. The air around her crackled with a dark, unnatural energy, and the shadows in the room began to writhe, twisting and contorting as if they were alive. Alice gasped, her body shaking as the power of the house pulsed through her, seizing her chest and making her heart race. The pedestal beneath her hand seemed to pulse with life, the symbols carved into it, glowing brighter, more intense. It felt as though the house itself was fighting back, pushing against her, trying to draw her into the very stone, to pull her into the core of the curse. "You cannot destroy me." The voice from the house hissed, its tone now rising to a deafening roar. "I am the foundation. I am the earth beneath you. I will always be here." The sound echoed in Alice's mind, a screeching, grinding noise that threatened to tear her thoughts apart. She could feel the walls of the room pressing in on her, the darkness thickening, suffocating. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her, the ground growing uneven as if the house were shifting, trying to tear her away from the pedestal. But Alice's grip tightened on the stone. She couldn't stop now. This was the final step. This was where the house's power had come from, where the curse had begun. The pedestal was the heart of it, the source of everything that had controlled her, everything that had held her family in its grip for generations. She couldn't let it win. With all her strength, Alice pushed forward, forcing herself to push the energy back. She closed her eyes, blocking out the voice, blocking out the chaos that surrounded her. She focused on the pedestal, on the symbols that had once been her family's curse. "You're not real," she whispered, her voice shaking with effort. "You're nothing but a shadow." As if in response, the pedestal trembled violently, its symbols flickering between light and dark, the stone groaning with a deafening screech. The darkness around Alice grew heavier, more suffocating, the shadows pressing in on her with a terrible force. She could hear the house's roar, its fury building as it fought against her, but Alice held her ground. She couldn't let it win. And then, with a sound like a breaking dam, the pedestal shattered. The explosion of energy sent Alice stumbling backward, her body crashing into the cold stone floor. She gasped for air as the room seemed to shift around her, the force of the explosion rattling her bones. The shadows screamed in fury, their dark tendrils swirling around her, but she couldn't focus on them. All she could focus on was the silence that followed the absence of the house's power, the absence of the presence that had haunted her for so long. That the stone pedestal was gone. The symbols had faded, disintegrating into dust, leaving nothing behind but a dark, empty space. The house was breaking, but even as the darkness seemed to dissipate, Alice could feel it. The house was still trying to hold on. The air still felt heavy, the weight of it pressing down on her, but there was something different now. It was weakening. The curse was finally being undone. She could feel it in her bones. Her hand trembled as she pushed herself to her feet, her body sore and aching from the violent tremors that had rocked the room. She looked around, her eyes searching the cellar, but the shadows were receding now, slowly unraveling like smoke dissipating in the wind. "Is it over?" she whispered, her voice hoarse, unsure. Daniel stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the space where the pedestal had once stood. "Almost," he said quietly, his voice filled with both relief and caution. "It's weakening, but you've only severed the bond to the house's power. The curse is still tied to something else. To you." Alice frowned, confused. "To me? But the house is..." "There's one last thing," Daniel interrupted, his voice grim. "The house is part of your family, Alice. It always has been. It's been feeding off your bloodline, and that connection, it's still there. Until you sever the bond completely, it won't truly end." Alice's heart clenched. The thought of the curse still being a part of her, of it always being a part of her bloodline, filled her with a cold dread she couldn't shake. But she couldn't stop now. She had come too far. She had broken the foundation of the house. But there was one more piece of this puzzle to complete. "What do I have to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Daniel turned to face her fully, his gaze unwavering. "There's a ritual, one that can sever the bond completely. It's tied to your family's history, the bloodline, the curse, everything. You need to go to the source. You need to find the heart of your family's connection to the house." Alice's stomach churned. "Where? How?" "There's a place," Daniel replied, his eyes narrowing with understanding. "A place hidden in your family's history. The key is in your past, your grandmother, your ancestors. You need to find the journal, the one your grandmother kept." Alice's mind raced, her thoughts flashing back to her grandmother's study, to the old books, the dusty shelves. There had been a journal, one she hadn't looked at since she was a child, one that had been hidden away, the key to everything buried in her family's past. She nodded, determination rising in her chest once more. "I'll find it. I'll finish this." Daniel's eyes softened, but there was still a hint of sorrow in his expression. "I'll come with you. We need to go before it regains its strength." Alice nodded. They weren't done yet, but this was the last step, and she would face it no matter what it took. Together they left the cellar, the house's power beginning to flicker and fade as they stepped out of the shadows. The journey from the cellar was a blur of determination, each step heavier than the last as Alice and Daniel moved through the house. The walls seemed to close in around them, the air still thick with the remnants of the dark energy that had once filled the rooms. The house was weakening, yes, but there was still an ominous hum in the background, a constant reminder that its presence hadn't fully dissipated. Alice's thoughts raced ahead of her, filled with questions, doubts, and a creeping sense of urgency. The ritual Daniel had spoken of, the one that could sever the last of the curse's hold over her bloodline, was tied to her grandmother's journal. She had almost forgotten about it, the old leather-bound book tucked away in the back of her grandmother's study, a relic of a past she had buried in her mind. But now, it felt like the last piece of a puzzle, the final key to unlocking the truth. The hallway they were walking down seemed endless, the shadows stretching longer with each step. The house was still alive in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. But she had to keep moving. The journal was the key, and she could feel its importance deep in her bones. "Where is it?" Alice asked, her voice low as she glanced at Daniel. His face was hard eyes fixed ahead, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the weight of the years of waiting for this moment pressing on him. Daniel didn't answer immediately, his expression unreadable as they moved toward the door that led to the study. When he spoke, his voice was filled with a quiet urgency. "Your grandmother's study is upstairs at the end of the hall. There's a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. It's the last place anyone would look." Alice nodded, her mind still racing. She could feel the pull of the house around her, as though it were watching them, waiting for them to make a mistake. The air was thick with the weight of the past, the weight of everything she had learned about her family's connection to the house, the curse that had been passed down through generations. They reached the staircase, and Alice paused at the bottom, glancing up at the darkened hall. The steps creaked beneath her feet as she ascended each one, echoing in the silence as though the house was waiting for something, waiting for her to return. She reached the top of the stairs and turned toward the study, the door at the end of the hall dark and closed. It had been so long since she had been in here, since she had even thought about the place. Her grandmother's study had always been a sanctuary, a place of old books and quiet reflection, but now it felt like a place of secrets. The door opened with a soft groan, and Alice stepped inside. The room was just as she remembered it, dimly lit by the fading light from the windows, the shelves lined with dusty books and old artifacts. But there was something different about it now. The air felt thick with the weight of history, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for her to find what had been hidden for so long. Daniel stood in the doorway, his eyes scanning the room. "It's here," he said quietly, stepping inside and moving toward the desk in the center of the room. "The journal should be beneath the floorboards." Alice nodded, her gaze falling to the floor. There, near the edge of the room, she could see it, the faint outline of a trapdoor, its edges barely visible beneath the dust and wood. She moved toward it, her heart beating faster with each step. This was it, the final piece, the last step in ending the curse. She knelt down and pried open the trapdoor, the hinges creaking as it gave way. The small compartment beneath was dark, but Alice could see the glint of something, a book bound in aged leather, its cover worn, but sturdy. She reached down and pulled it out, the weight of it heavy in her hands as she opened the journal. The pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded in places, but still legible. Alice's fingers trembled as she turned the pages, the words revealing a history she had never fully understood. Her grandmother's handwriting filled the pages, detailing the origins of the curse, the creation of the mirror, and the binding of the house to her family's bloodline. The deeper Alice read, the more she felt the weight of the truth settle over her. The realization that the house had been a part of her family from the very beginning. It was never just a house. She whispered, her voice breaking, as she read the final entry in the journal. It was a prison for the souls of those who have been consumed by its power. And we, our bloodline, are the key to either its destruction or its rebirth. Alice's heart pounded in her chest as the words sank in. The curse had never truly been broken. It had only been delayed, passed down through the generations, waiting for the right moment to claim her. And now, she had to make a choice. The journal offered no easy solution, no simple way to undo everything that had been done. But there was one thing that stood out: the ritual. The final ritual that could sever the bond between her bloodline and the house. Alice turned to Daniel, her face pale but determined. "What now?" she asked, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. He stepped closer, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding. "We go to the heart of the house. The ritual will finish what you started, but we must do it before the house can recover its power." Alice nodded. There was no turning back. She had already made it this far. She closed the journal, her fingers brushing the cover one last time. And with a deep breath, she turned toward the door, knowing that the final confrontation was ahead. She could feel the house watching them, waiting for them to make their move. But this time she wouldn't be afraid. This time she would end it. The air in the study felt heavier now, thick with the weight of everything Alice had just uncovered. The journal felt like a weight in her hands, its pages full of history of the curse that had haunted her family for generations. Her heart raced as she closed the journal. The truth now clear in her mind. The house had never been just a building. It was an entity, a force, something tied to her bloodline in a way that she had never understood until now. She turned to face Daniel, who stood silently watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He seemed to understand the weight of the moment as much as she did. There was no turning back now. The house had fed on her family for centuries, and she had the key to destroy it. But at what cost? "Are you ready?" Daniel asked, his voice quiet but steady. Alice swallowed hard, her gaze flickering back toward the hallway that led to the basement, where the heart of the curse had been born. "I have to be," she said, her voice thick with determination, but also with the fear that had been gnawing at the edges of her resolve. She was scared. She couldn't deny it. The weight of the house's power still clung to her, threatening to pull her under. But she had already fought the darkness before, and she wasn't going to stop now. Together, they walked toward the stairs, the silence of the house pressing in on them as they descended into the belly of the building once more. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the house itself was trying to pull them back, trying to remind them that it wasn't done, that it never would be. The cellar door loomed ahead, the flickering shadows casting long, dark shapes across the floor. Alice's heart beat in her chest like a drum, each step forward, filled with the weight of what they had to do. The ritual Daniel had spoken of was their last chance, their only chance. When they reached the bottom of the stairs, Alice stopped in front of the altar, the same altar where she had poured the liquid and shattered the stone pedestal. The room now felt eerily still, the oppressive energy that had once filled it gone. The shadows still lingered at the edges, but there was no more heavy thrum of power, no more sense of the house's presence. "This is it," Daniel said softly, his gaze fixed on the altar. His eyes were filled with something else now, something that Alice couldn't quite place. Was it regret, fear, or perhaps just a quiet understanding of what had to be done? Whatever it was, it made the air feel thicker, heavier. Alice nodded, her heart thudding in her chest. "I'm ready," she whispered, but Daniel shook his head. his eyes darkening. "You need to understand, Alice. The ritual can't be forced. It has to come from you. The house has been tied to your bloodline for generations. It's tied to you. You have to let go. Let it end." The words felt like a punch to the stomach, the final confirmation that this wasn't just a fight against a haunted house. It was a fight against herself, against her bloodline, against the very darkness that had lived within her, feeding on her family for as long as they had walked this earth. "I've already fought this," Alice said, her voice shaking but determined. "I've already faced it. It doesn't have power over me anymore." Daniel didn't answer right away. He just watched her, his gaze intense, as though he were trying to measure something inside her. Finally, he nodded. "I believe you." Alice closed her eyes for a moment, gathering herself, feeling the house, the curse, trying to reach for her, trying to pull her back. But she wasn't going to let it. Not anymore. The journal, the rituals, the dark presence in the house, all of it had been a part of her, a part of her family. But now it was time to end it. She stepped forward, her heart pounding, and knelt before the altar once more. The stone beneath her felt cold against her skin, but she wasn't afraid. She placed her hands on the surface, feeling the thrum of the house's power, still buried deep in the walls and the earth itself. It wasn't gone. Not yet. She focused on the symbols etched into the altar, the same ones that had been carved into the mirror, the same ones that had connected her to the house. She closed her eyes, her mind quieting as she reached for the ritual, the words her grandmother had once spoken to her, the words that had been passed down through generations. "Blood binds us." Alice whispered the ancient words slipping from her lips like a song. "And with it we are free." The moment she spoke the words, the air around her shifted. The darkness reacted, surging toward her with the intensity of a storm. But Alice was ready. She stood her ground, her hands pressing harder into the stone, her heart open and steady. She was the key. She had always been the key. "Let it end," Alice breathed. "Let it end." The room seemed to tremble, the air vibrating with energy, and then a light. A brilliant, blinding light exploded from the altar surrounding her, filling the entire cellar with an intense brightness. Alice's body shook with the force of it, but she didn't let go. She couldn't let go. The light engulfed her completely, and for a moment it felt like time had stopped. Everything froze. The house, the shadows, the whispers, everything went silent, and then as quickly as it had come, the light faded. When Alice opened her eyes, the room was still. The shadows that had once filled the space had vanished. The oppressive weight was gone. The altar, once filled with dark energy, was now just a stone slab, quiet and still. The air felt clean almost. The suffocating presence of the house of the curse was finally gone. Alice took a deep breath, her body trembling, but a sense of calm slowly filled her chest. She was free. She had done it. Behind her, Daniel let out a breath, his body relaxing as the tension in the room faded. "It's over," he said softly, his voice filled with a quiet relief. "You did it. You broke the curse." Alice nodded, her gaze shifting to the shattered remnants of the pedestal, to the broken symbols, and then finally to Daniel. "It's finally over," she whispered, though the words felt surreal. "It's really over." But even as she spoke the words, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered something else. Is it truly over? The house had tried to consume her once before, and though it seemed like the curse had been broken, part of her wondered if the darkness was truly gone, or if it was just lying dormant, waiting for the next soul to claim. But for now, Alice allowed herself to breathe, to feel the weight of her victory. She had faced the house, she had destroyed it, and for the first time in her life, Alice felt truly free. The silence of the cellar was overwhelming. The room, once filled with a suffocating darkness, now seemed almost too quiet. Alice's heart still raced, her pulse thundering in her ears, but she could feel the weight of the house, the curse, finally lifting. The oppressive shadows had receded, leaving behind a sense of emptiness, a hollow space where fear had once lived. Daniel stood beside her, watching her carefully, as if waiting for the storm to pass. His eyes were filled with something unreadable, relief perhaps, but also uncertainty. Alice could see it in the way he held himself, his posture tense despite the absence of the curse, as if he knew deep down that something wasn't finished, that there was still a piece of the puzzle yet to be solved. She felt it too. The sense of finality lingered, but in the back of her mind there was a quiet voice, a nagging feeling that said it wasn't truly over. The house had been destroyed, the connection severed, but someone had been with her throughout this entire journey. The woman in the mirror, her family's dark legacy, the shadows that had clung to her every step. What had it all meant? Had it been truly broken? Or had something of it, some dark part of her history, remained? Is it truly over? Alice asked, her voice soft, barely above a whisper. Daniel turned to her, his face grim but thoughtful. He didn't speak for a moment, his eyes flickering toward the altar, now silent and still. "You've destroyed the source, Alice," he said, his voice steady. "The bond has been broken. The house won't come back. Not like before." Alice nodded, but something deep inside her still felt uneasy. What about the rest of it? What about the house's hold on her bloodline? What about the connection that had always existed and that had been passed down through generations? Your family's bloodline. It's not bound to the house anymore. Daniel added, his gaze meeting hers. The curse is severed. It's over for you. Alice's chest tightened as the weight of his words settled in. She was free. She had freed herself from the house, from its hold on her family. But there was something she couldn't shake, a feeling that the story wasn't finished, that the curse, though broken, had not truly been eradicated. But for now she could only breathe. She turned her attention back to the cellar, to the space around her. The dark energy that had once filled the room with its suffocating presence was gone. In its place was only quiet. She looked to the stone altar where the dark symbols had once glowed, and for the first time she felt a strange sense of peace. "This is it," Alice whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "This is where it ends." The darkness had taken so much from her, her family, her childhood, her sense of peace. But she had fought for it all, and now she had won. The house was no longer alive with its malevolent energy. The curse had been broken. But as she stood in the stillness of the cellar, surrounded by the remnants of the house's influence, Alice couldn't help but feel that something deep in the fabric of her soul had shifted. She had faced the house, faced the darkest parts of herself, and emerged victorious. But there would always be a piece of this place within her, a reminder of everything she had endured. And yet, despite everything, the pain, the fear, the terror, there was one thing Alice knew for certain. She was free. Daniel, sensing her hesitation, moved closer, his expression softening. "You did it," he said, his voice carrying a quiet admiration. "You broke the curse. You freed yourself." Alice looked up at him, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding. "And I'll never look back." Her words were final, certain, as though a door had closed behind her, leaving the past where it belonged. But as she stood there staring at the remnants of the house's power, Alice felt a flicker of something else, an awareness that despite the battle she had fought, the house had not just been a house. It had been a mirror to her own past, a reflection of the darkness that had been passed down through her bloodline. And now she would move forward. She took one last look around the cellar before turning away, Daniel following her every step, the house with all its ghosts, its shadows, its whispers was behind her, and ahead of her lay a life free of its grip. She could breathe. She could live, and for the first time in a long while, Alice felt hope. But as they climbed the stairs, the door creaking open behind them, she knew she couldn't forget the journey that had brought her here. The house had shaped her. It had changed her. But it hadn't defined her. Alice was more than the curse. She was free, and she would never let it consume her again. The door to the cellar closed behind them with a soft click, leaving Alice and Daniel standing in the quiet of the hallway. The air felt different now, lighter, almost normal. For the first time since Alice had set foot in the house, the silence wasn't oppressive. It wasn't filled with whispers or the weight of an ancient curse. It was simply silent. Alice took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. She couldn't quite place the feeling that had settled in her chest. Was it relief? Was it the absence of the house's crushing presence? Or was it something more, something deeper, lingering beneath the surface? Maybe it was just the calm after the storm. After everything she had been through, the house, the mirror, the curse, this was the first moment she truly felt free. "Where do we go from here?" Alice asked quietly, her voice softer than usual, as if she were still processing everything. She looked at Daniel, who stood beside her, his expression thoughtful, almost distant. Daniel gave a slight smile, but there was a sadness in his eyes, a quiet acknowledgement of everything that had been lost. "For now we leave," he said. "The house is gone. The curse has been broken. You're free, Alice. For the first time in your life, you're free." Alice nodded, the weight of his words settling in her chest. The relief was overwhelming, but at the same time, there was a sense of uncertainty. How did one begin again after a lifetime of darkness? After carrying the weight of a curse that had been passed down through generations, what came next? She turned toward the door, her eyes lingering on the empty hallway. This house had been a part of her family's history for so long, its dark influence stretching through the very foundation of her bloodline. And now, for the first time, it was truly over. But the house wasn't just a place, it had been a reflection of something much darker, something more insidious, a legacy of darkness that had haunted her family. And though the house was gone, she couldn't help but wonder about the ripple effects that would continue long after the last of its walls crumbled. "Is it really over?" Alice whispered more to herself than to Daniel. "I mean really over." Daniel paused, then stepped toward her, his expression softer now. "Yes," he said firmly, his voice reassuring. "The house is gone. The curse was tied to you. But you've severed the connection. The darkness can't follow you anymore. You've broken free." Alice felt his words settle deep in her heart. She had broken free, but there was still something stirring within her, something she couldn't quite place. It was a feeling, an awareness that perhaps the house had been just one part of something much larger. She shook her head, trying to push the thought away. No, she told herself. The house was done. The curse was broken. She had fought through the darkest parts of her life and emerged victorious. The road ahead of her would be free from the shadows that had once loomed over her. But there was one thing Alice needed to do, something that had been buried in the chaos of her fight for freedom. The journal, her grandmother's journal. It was time to face the truth, to uncover what had been hidden for so long, and to finally put the past to rest. Alice turned to Daniel, her voice more resolute now. "I need to see the journal," she said. "There's something I need to understand. About my family. About everything." Daniel nodded, his face serious but understanding. "I knew you would. It's a part of this, Alice. Your family's history, your bloodline. You need to know the full truth." He turned toward the stairs, his hand on the railing, as he began to ascend. Alice followed the sense of finality growing with each step. The study her grandmother's study was just ahead. The journal was waiting its secrets, still hidden beneath layers of dust and time. When they reached the study, the door was still slightly ajar. The room inside was quiet, the shelves lined with books, the old desk in the center of the room holding the weight of history. Alice stepped inside, her heart racing once again as she approached the familiar wooden desk. The journal was still there, resting on the desk just as she had left it. She reached out her fingers, brushing the worn leather cover, the weight of it familiar, but also heavy. It was a connection to the past, a past that had been filled with shadows, with secrets and lies. But it was also a connection to her grandmother, to the woman who had raised her, who had loved her, even though she had kept so many things hidden. Alice sat down at the desk and opened the journal. The pages were old, the ink faded, but the words were still legible, still filled with the pain and the knowledge that had shaped her family's history. She began to read, her eyes scanning the pages, the truth unfolding before her. The journal was a map of her family's involvement with the curse, with the house, with the mirror. But it was more than that. It was a record of how the house had claimed them piece by piece, generation after generation. It had never just been a physical space. It was a presence, a force that had taken root in their souls and their very blood. The last entry was the most chilling. The house will always return. Her grandmother had written, her handwriting shaky as though she had been afraid even as she wrote it. The curse will follow the bloodline. There is no escaping it. But one day, one of us will destroy it. One of us will end it. Alice closed the journal, the weight of her grandmother's words settling heavily on her shoulders. She had done it. She had fulfilled the prophecy. She had ended the curse, and yet there was still one thing that gnawed at her, a question that lingered in her mind, one that she hadn't fully understood until now. Why her? Why had the house chosen her? Why had she been the one to break the curse? She turned to Daniel, her voice soft but filled with something new, something raw. "Do you ever wonder why it was me, why the house chose me?" Daniel met her gaze, his face unreadable for a moment, before he nodded slowly. "Because you were always meant to be the one to break it," he said quietly. "You were the one who could see through the darkness, the one who could face it and fight back." Alice looked at the journal again, the weight of everything she had learned sinking in. The curse had been a part of her, but she had broken it. She stood up, her heart filled with a strange peace, as if the house was no longer part of her, but had become a distant memory. "It's over." Alice whispered the words, finally settling into her soul. It's really over. The shadows that had once clung to her, the curse that had defined her life, were gone. And for the first time, she felt free, truly free. And ahead of her, there was a world she could now embrace, a world unburdened by the weight of the past. As the words, "It's really over," echoed in Alice's mind, she stood there in the quiet of the study, her hands still resting on the journal. The weight of her family's legacy, its curse, its darkness had been lifted, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something she hadn't fully understood. something that had always lurked in the shadows just out of reach. She turned to look at Daniel, who was standing by the window, his gaze distant. He had been a part of this world for so long, a silent observer of the house's power, and she knew that his understanding of it went deeper than hers. He had lived with the weight of its curse just as she had. But now, for both of them, there was a chance to leave it all behind, to walk away and never look back. What now? Alice asked the question, hanging in the air like a soft murmur. What happens after this? Daniel turned to her, his expression unreadable for a moment, before a small, almost sad smile tugged at the corners of his lips. We move on, he said simply. The house is gone. The curse is broken. Now it's time to live. Alice swallowed hard, the words sinking in. She had fought so long, battled the darkness, and now there was nothing left but the future. But what did that future look like? How did she move forward after everything that had happened? The room felt quieter, the oppressive energy of the house gone. But even as the house's hold over them seemed to disappear, Alice couldn't quite shake the weight of the past. It was as if the past was still tethered to her, lingering just out of sight. I don't know if I can ever forget, Alice said quietly, more to herself than to Daniel. The house. What it did to my family. What it did to me. I don't think I can ever just walk away from that. Daniel nodded, his expression softening. You don't have to forget, Alice. But you can let go. You've broken free. You've destroyed the curse. And that's enough. It doesn't define you anymore. His words were a balm, soothing the last remnants of the pain that had clung to her soul. Alice nodded slowly, though the truth of it was still settling inside her. The journey to this point had been long and harrowing, but for the first time, she could see the possibility of a new life, one that was her own, free from the curse, free from the house's grip. I don't know what comes next, Alice said softly, turning to the window, her gaze meeting the soft twilight sky outside. But I know it's not the house. Daniel joined her at the window, standing beside her in the quiet. The last rays of the setting sun filtered through the trees outside, casting a warm glow over the landscape. It felt peaceful now, the tension that had once consumed everything, slowly fading into the background. The house is gone. Daniel repeated, his voice firm but gentle. You're free, and so am I. But it's not just about leaving the house behind, Alice. It's about leaving everything that came with it. Leaving the fear, the anger, the darkness behind. Alice felt a sense of calm settle over her as she gazed at the world outside. The house was no longer part of her. The curse was no longer part of her family's history. It had all been broken, shattered in the quiet moments before they had found the truth. I've been afraid my whole life, Alice admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Afraid of what the house could do. Afraid of what it meant. And I've spent so long running from it. I don't know what to do with myself now. Daniel's hand rested gently on her shoulder, a simple gesture of reassurance. You don't have to know yet. Just breathe. You've earned this freedom. The weight of his words settled into Alice's chest like a weight lifted from her heart. For so long, the shadows had dominated. Her life controlled her every move. But now, for the first time, she could choose her path. She didn't have to run. She didn't have to live in fear. She could decide what came next. She turned to face Daniel, meeting his gaze. And you? What about you? What happens to you now? Daniel seemed to hesitate, his eyes flickering for just a moment before he answered. I've been waiting for this, for you to break the curse, for you to find your way out of the house's grasp. Now I'm free too. His words hung in the air for a long moment, their meaning heavy. Alice had never fully understood Daniel's past, his connection to the house and its curse. He had been a part of it, but now he was free too. The house had no claim over him anymore. There was a finality in that, a quiet end to a long, twisted chapter of their lives. Together, they stood in the room, the weight of everything that had happened still pressing on their hearts, but lighter now, as though the chains had been broken. There was nothing more to fear, nothing more to face. The house was gone. The curse had been destroyed, and now for the first time, they could both breathe. "What now?" Alice asked again, but this time the words held no fear. They were simple, hopeful. "What comes next?" Daniel gave her a small smile, one filled with quiet understanding. "Whatever we make of it. The world's out there, Alice. And now it's ours." Alice's heart lifted, her thoughts quieting as she took in the moment. The house, the curse, the dark history that had bound her family, it was over. She could finally step out into the world, unburdened, free. As they walked toward the door, the sun setting outside, casting a soft golden glow over the world, Alice finally understood. She didn't need to look back anymore. She didn't need to carry the past with her. The house had no claim over her. Her family's bloodline had no claim over her. For the first time in her life, Alice felt truly free, and as she stepped out into the world, she knew that the future was hers to create. The crisp night air greeted Alice as she stepped outside, her feet solid on the earth that had once been tied to the house's curse. For the first time, it felt like she was breathing in new air, as if she had never fully understood what it meant to be free until this very moment. The weight of the past had been lifted, and for the first time in her life, Alice felt unburdened. There were no shadows chasing her, no ancient curse pulling at her soul. There was only the open sky, the quiet earth beneath her feet, and the horizon stretching out before her like a canvas waiting to be filled. She glanced at Daniel, who stood beside her, his eyes fixed on the same horizon. There was a quiet understanding between them, a shared bond born out of everything they had faced together, everything they had fought to escape. But it wasn't over yet. They had won, yes, but the real challenge had only just begun. They had both been trapped by the house's dark history for so long. They had both carried the weight of it whether they wanted to or not. And now, they were free. "Where do we go from here?" Alice asked, her voice soft in the stillness of the night. She wasn't asking out of uncertainty anymore, but more out of curiosity. After everything that had happened, everything they had both endured, what came next? What was there to look forward to in a world that had been so shaped by darkness? Daniel turned to her, his expression thoughtful. For a long moment, he didn't speak, his gaze wandering over the land before them. It was as if he were searching for the right words, the right direction. Finally, he met her gaze, his eyes soft, almost reflective. "We go wherever we choose," he said, his voice steady and calm, as if the answer had always been there. "We create our own path now. The house, that part of our lives, is over. The curse has no more hold on us. What we choose from here on out is our choice." Alice nodded slowly, the words settling in her mind, sinking deeper with each breath. Their choice. For so long, her life had been controlled by the weight of her family's curse, the house that had consumed them for generations. But now, for the first time, she was the one who could decide what came next. She wasn't bound to the house anymore. She wasn't a prisoner of her past. "What do you want?" Daniel Alice asked, her voice quiet. It was a simple question, but the answer carried so much more weight. What did he want after everything they had been through? Everything he had endured, what was left for him? What did he hope for now that the chains had been broken? Daniel's eyes softened as he looked at her, a slow smile tugging at his lips. "I want peace," he said, his voice filled with a quiet determination. "I've been running for so long, trapped in the house's shadow. Now I want to find a place where the past doesn't follow me. I want to create something of my own, something free." Alice's heart stirred with something she couldn't quite name. It was hope. It was the understanding that despite the darkness they had both been through, they were both standing here free and ready to move forward. "And you, Daniel?" asked his voice, soft but insistent. "What do you want, Alice? What's next for you?" Alice paused, her gaze drifting over the world in front of her. The landscape stretched out, bathed in the soft light of the moon, a world untouched by the curse that had shadowed her life. For the first time, Alice realized she had never allowed herself to ask that question before. She had always been too focused on surviving, on escaping the house. But now that she was free, she could choose. "I want to live," Alice said finally, her voice filled with quiet conviction. "I've spent my whole life running, hiding, fighting against something that wasn't even mine to fight. But now I want to see what's beyond the house. I want to live truly live. I want to build something that's mine, something that has nothing to do with the past." Daniel's smile deepened, and for the first time Alice saw the genuine warmth in his eyes. There was no more weight there, no more sorrow. They were both standing in a place where the past no longer defined them. They were free. And for the first time, Alice believed it deep in her bones. "You don't have to do it alone," Daniel said, his voice soft but unwavering. "We can build something together, Alice. A life, a future away from all of this." Alice felt her chest tighten, a mix of emotions flooding her. Hope, fear, gratitude. She wasn't alone anymore. The house, the curse, it was all behind her. And whatever lay ahead, she didn't have to face it alone. Together, Alice repeated the word, tasting different on her tongue, but sweet, full of possibilities. Yes, together. She took a deep breath, her gaze lifting to the sky, the stars scattered above them, infinite and untouched. The darkness of the past had been replaced with a kind of quiet peace. A peace she had never known before. The curse had shaped her, yes, but it had not destroyed her. And now she was free to choose. "We'll start fresh," Alice said, a quiet resolve in her voice. "We'll create a life one step at a time." As they stood there side by side, looking out over the world that had once seemed so dark and uncertain, Alice felt something new stir inside her. Something bright, something alive. The future was wide open, and for the first time it was hers to shape. The night deepened around them, but Alice didn't feel the familiar weight of the dark anymore. The stars above seemed to shine brighter now, as if the world itself were offering a promise of new beginnings, of freedom, of choices, not bound by the curse that had hung over her for so long. The house, the mirror, the shadows, they were all gone now, but the world ahead of her stretched out in infinite possibilities, untouched by the past. "I've never known a world like this," Alice whispered to herself, almost as if speaking the words into the night, letting them escape from her lungs like a breath she had been holding for years. "A world where I'm not running." Daniel's steady presence beside her was all the reassurance she needed. His hand brushed against hers, a simple gesture, but it carried a weight of its own. They were together in this. They had both broken free, and now they could create something, anything together. The future, once shrouded in the darkness of the house, was now wide open. "We don't have to figure it all out tonight," Daniel said, his voice steady, a comforting anchor in the uncertainty that Alice felt. "One step at a time. Whatever you want, Alice. We can do it. She looked up at him, meeting his gaze, and for the first time she didn't feel the need to explain. He understood. He knew what it meant to escape, what it meant to be free from the past. And for that, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. You're right, Alice said softly, her voice filled with quiet determination. One step at a time, she turned back toward the horizon, the path before them stretching endlessly into the distance. There were still fears, still uncertainties ahead, but the house, the curse, was behind her. The shadows had lifted. What happens when we leave? Alice asked, her voice a little uncertain, but filled with a sense of wonder. When we leave this place, this house behind, where do we go? Daniel smiled, a warmth in his eyes that melted away the last of the doubts Alice had been carrying. Wherever we want, he said, his voice full of promise. The world is ours, Alice. You've freed yourself from the house. The only thing left now is to decide what you want to create. And in that moment, something deep inside Alice clicked. She was standing on the edge of a new life, a new chapter. And for the first time, she wasn't burdened by the weight of her family's history. She wasn't weighed down by the darkness of the house, the curse that had followed her for generations. She was free. She turned to face Daniel, her heart racing with the possibility of it all. I don't know what's out there yet, she said, her voice quiet, but filled with something new, a spark, a hope. But I'm ready to find out. I'm ready to step forward. Daniel's hand reached out, and Alice took it without hesitation, their fingers intertwining. There was no need for words now. There was nothing left to fear. Together they walked away from the house, the curse, the shadows, and into the unknown. They didn't know what lay ahead, but they knew one thing: they were free. And that was enough. The road ahead was theirs to choose. They could build something new, something that wasn't tied to the past, a life of their own. Alice breathed in deeply, the air filling her lungs like the first breath of a new beginning. She could feel the weight lifting, feel the shadows that had once clung to her bloodline falling away. The house had been part of her family's history, but it wasn't part of her anymore. She was no longer defined by it. The darkness that had once seemed so overwhelming, so all-encompassing, was no more. The curse had been broken, and with it, Alice had found something she thought she'd lost long ago herself. Where to now? She asked, her voice filled with wonder as she squeezed Daniel's hand. He looked at her, his expression soft but certain. Wherever we want. The world is wide open. And as they walked into the night, the weight of their past slowly melting away, Alice felt the first true sense of peace she had known in her life. They were free, and their future was waiting. The path ahead was no longer shrouded in darkness. With each step, the world around them began to take on a new shape, as if the landscape itself had been waiting for Alice to step forward, for the curse to be truly broken, for the house's power to be severed from her family's bloodline. The night air felt fresh against her skin, the crispness of it filling her lungs as she walked alongside Daniel, the sound of their footsteps merging into the quiet stillness of the night. Alice wasn't sure what she had expected when she first stepped out of the house, but the world before her now seemed full of endless possibilities. There was no fear, no shadows lurking in the corners of her mind, no mirrors calling her back to the past. There was only the road ahead. It was uncertain, but it was hers to walk, and for the first time she could choose where it led. They walked in silence for a while, the only sound being the soft rustle of leaves in the wind, the occasional distant hoot of an owl, and the faint call of insects in the trees. The forest stretched out around them, its dark silhouette softened by the glow of the moon, as if the night itself had been gently transformed, made more peaceful. Alice glanced at Daniel, who had been quiet for the past few moments. He had been a constant presence, a shadow that had walked beside her through the darkest parts of her journey. But now, for the first time, he seemed lighter too. The weight of the house, the curse, had lifted from both of them. They were free. "Where do you think we'll go?" Alice asked, her voice breaking the comfortable silence. Daniel smiled slightly, his eyes glancing over at her. "Wherever we need to. It doesn't have to be far. I think, for now, it's about finding peace, about learning what it means to live without the weight of what we've been through." Alice nodded. The idea of peace was still foreign to her. It felt like something she had never truly known, something she had never been allowed to experience. But she was ready for it. She was ready to explore this new life, to carve out a future that wasn't burdened by fear, by the weight of family history, by a house that had tried to consume everything she loved. They reached the edge of the forest, where the trees parted to reveal an open field. The moonlight bathed the grass in silver, the soft glow illuminating the way forward. The world felt endless here, untouched by the shadows of the past. The road ahead was open wide, stretching into the unknown. "I never thought I'd get here," Alice said, her voice soft, but filled with a quiet joy. "I never thought I'd be able to stand here without the past hanging over me." Daniel glanced at her, his eyes warm. "Neither did I, but look at us now. We made it." Alice took a deep breath, her eyes sweeping across the open field. It felt like something monumental had shifted in her. The curse, the house, her family's history, they no longer defined her. She was her own person now. And whatever lay ahead, she could face it. She would face it. But it wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about living. It was about learning how to exist in a world free from the weight of her family's legacy. She didn't have to carry the darkness anymore. She could create her own future. She turned to Daniel, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think the world will ever feel normal again?" Daniel chuckled softly, his hand brushing against hers as they continued walking. "Normal, maybe not, but it'll feel like our world, the world we make, and that's enough, right?" Alice smiled, the tension that had clung to her for so long easing just a little more. The world may never be the same. It couldn't be. She couldn't forget what she had been through, what she had lost, but she didn't need to forget. She just needed to live, to move forward, to honor the past, but not be trapped by it. She was ready. "We'll make it our world," Alice said, her voice steady with newfound confidence. "And we'll make it count." Daniel gave her a look, his expression softened with affection and understanding. "We will," he said simply. The field before them stretched out the horizon, bathed in the soft, calming glow of the moon. The past, with its curses and darkness, was behind them. The house was nothing more than a distant memory, a shadow fading into the night. The world ahead was waiting, and for the first time in Alice's life, she felt ready to meet it. The night stretched on as Alice and Daniel walked side by side, the silence between them, comfortable, unburdened. There were no more shadows lingering in the corners, no haunting whispers, no curses pulling at the edges of their thoughts. Just the steady rhythm of their footsteps on the earth beneath them, the soft rustle of the trees around them, and the ever-present pull of the future, vast and open before them. Alice felt lighter with every step, as though the weight of her family's dark legacy had finally been shed, leaving only the woman she was meant to be. Her heart, once burdened by fear, now beat with the promise of freedom. And the more she thought about it, the more the realization struck her. She had never truly been alone. Not really. The house had tried to make her believe it. The curse had made her feel trapped, isolated. But in the end, it It was her strength, her refusal to succumb to the darkness that had set her free. She glanced at Daniel, who was walking beside her, his face illuminated by the moonlight. He had been there, a quiet force, a constant presence in her life since they had met in this cursed house. And now they were walking away from it together. There was no more fear in her chest when she looked at him. No more hesitation. The future was theirs to shape. "Do you ever think about what's next?" Alice asked softly, her voice just above a whisper, as they walked, the words feeling new to her, like a promise. Daniel paused, glancing at her with a quiet smile. "I think about it every day. About living without the house, without the curse, without the darkness. About finding out what it means to be free." Alice's heart skipped at the thought. Freedom. The word felt so strange, so foreign to her, but in a way that filled her with excitement. For so long she had been consumed by fear, by the weight of what the house had placed on her, by the constant pressure of a family history that had held her hostage. But now she was free, completely, and she could finally make choices that were hers. "I guess it's like starting from scratch," Alice said with a small smile, feeling the truth of it in her bones. Starting fresh. Daniel nodded, his gaze distant for a moment. "In some ways, yes. But in others, it's not about forgetting everything that came before. It's about accepting it, understanding it, and then choosing what you want from here on out." They stopped walking for a moment, standing at the edge of a clearing that opened up beneath the starlit sky. The moon hung low, casting a gentle light over the meadow. The cool night breeze played with the edges of Alice's hair, and she closed her eyes for a moment, just taking in the stillness, the peace that surrounded them. "You're right," Alice said quietly, a soft sense of calm washing over her. "It's not about forgetting. It's about moving forward." There was something liberating in that. The idea that the past didn't have to be erased to make room for the future. She didn't need to push it all away. She didn't need to be consumed by it. She could remember, but she didn't have to let it define her. She could let it be a part of who she was, but not the only part. They stood there for a while, side by side, the sounds of the night filling the space around them. There was no rush, no pressure, just the gentle passing of time, a quiet understanding between them that said they had come through something together. And now they were free to choose what came next. Alice turned toward Daniel, her gaze soft but steady. "Do you ever think about where you'll go from here?" He met her eyes, and for the first time, his face held no trace of the burden he had carried for so long. No more shadows, no more lingering doubts. There was only calm, the kind that came with knowing you had crossed the hardest part of your journey. "I think about a lot of things," he said, his voice quiet, but filled with something new. "I think about a life that's not defined by the house or the curse. About creating something meaningful, something real." Alice smiled, feeling a weight lifting off her chest. For so long she had been alone in this battle, but now, standing here beside him, she realized she wasn't. They had both faced the darkness together, and now they were walking into the light. "Let's build that life," Alice said, her voice filled with quiet certainty. "Together." Daniel's smile softened and he nodded. Together. They stood there for a moment, looking at the sky, at the world around them. And for the first time, Alice felt the truth of it. They were the creators of their future. The curse was gone. The house was behind them. And whatever came next, they would face it with strength, with understanding, and with the freedom they had fought so hard to claim. The road ahead was theirs to choose. The house would never return. The curse would never follow them. And as they turned to leave the clearing, their hands brushing together once more, Alice knew this was the beginning of the rest of their lives. together, and the world ahead was theirs to explore one step at a time.